In My Hero Academia, we've seen Izuku go from hero to vigilante to once again a hero. But today I ask, what would happen if Izuku Midoriya started a vigilante? When I first started production to this video, I had a completely different vision for what would come out. In fact, I didn't even know what quirk I was actually giving Deku for this one. But as I continued making this video, it just got more and more entertaining for me. It started off as a passion project and ended off as honestly one of the best videos that I've done in a while. And that's saying a lot considering I just recently dropped What If Deku Had the Golden Touch, which was one of my more original stories that I've done in a while. But this one is kind of like its predecessor, and I love this video so much. The quirk idea, the plot progression, everything about this, I genuinely had a blast making. So if you're going to enjoy this one, then please smash the like button, seeing as it helps do so much better in the algorithm, and it keeps me more motivated to make bangers like this for you guys all the time. So let's aim for 2K likes, and with no further ado, enjoy. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm sure a lot of you guys don't know this, but it's very rare that I'll randomly just be doing something in the middle of the day and just get an idea that in my head I'm like, wait, I could cook with that. Today just so happens to be one of those days, and the quirk idea that I got is heavily, if not fully, inspired by Clash Royale. If many of you guys don't play it, or maybe you're an OG player, then you would know the card known as the Bandit or the Boss Bandit, which essentially has an ability to dash at their opponents, which is the quirk and ability that Deku's going to be having in this timeline. And I thought it'd be a pretty interesting ability considering that it's not something inherently broken, because it doesn't give Deku actual super speed, it just gives Deku the ability to dash at his opponents. Now, how far can the dash happen, and can he dash at his opponents and all that stuff? I still haven't really thought about it, just because I just clicked record and I just wanted to make this video. Like, it's a Saturday, bro. Like, when Quirk Deku just dropped, and I wasn't even planning on making this. I was actually going to record What If Naruto Was Gojo's Reincarnation, which is a video that I know you guys have been asking for a long time, and I'm finally back to doing it. Trust, it will drop this month. But anyways, point being, I just am really excited to get started with this video. So let me think about how I actually want this to happen. Okay, so I think that I want Deku to think of himself as quirkless until we get to the point in the story where Izuku is having his encounter with the Sludge villain. Alright, so here's how I believe everything's gonna take place. Much like in the original story, I want Deku to have gone to school, get bullied by Bakugo a little bit, and ultimately take the path home that he would take that normally would lead him to the Sludge villain. There, what I would want to have happen is for Deku to have like a really cool moment where he like awakens his quirk. So let's just do that. We begin everything off with Deku making his way home via the strange tunnel path where he encounters a Sludge villain, and as Izuku would be sitting there going, ah, ha, 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 like laughing, thinking to himself that his dream isn't over, suddenly a manhole cover would start shaking, and out from it would come the Sludge villain. As Izuku would turn around and see the sludgy, gooey substance, Izuku would find his legs literally lock up as Izuku could feel himself unable to move. In this moment, as the Sludge villain would grow larger and larger, Izuku would attempt to run away, but the moment that he would do this, the Sludge villain would latch onto Izuku's leg, not letting Izuku move a muscle, and in this moment the sludgy substance would start covering him. As Izuku would start ripping at it and trying to tug it off of himself, Izuku would notice one thing: he couldn't, and as the thought of death would finally hit Izuku and he would realize that he literally is screwed unless he can get out of this somehow, his quirk would activate for the first time, granting Izuku the ability to essentially go back to before he had ran from the Sludge villain. Essentially a back in time effect, or kind of like a Boss Bandit ability dash. I'm gonna put something up on screen. Hopefully don't hold me to it, but if I don't, just look up Boss Bandit dash. She essentially can dash at you and then go back to before she had dashed. That's what Izuku's quirk is going to be. And with this being the case, Izuku would pretty much stand there like gasping for air. So he would think, how did I? But before Izuku can even continue that thought, All Might, grabbing Izuku by the arm, would then throw a Texas smash to the direction of the villain, which would lead it to splatter everywhere, with Izuku sitting there stunned, but not even thinking about the interaction that he had just had take place with the Sludge villain. Right now, all he could think about was All Might. So, getting a signed autograph from All Might and then going on to help him collect the Sludge villain, Izuku would go on to ask All Might if he believes somebody could become a hero while quirkless. And All Might this time, because he didn't have to wait for Izuku to wake up this time around, which would have saved more time, would probably lead to All Might telling Izuku that he doesn't believe he can be a hero. Telling him that even though he can't be one, that doesn't mean he can't still help society in some way. But with Izuku looking down and feeling defeated and All Might recognizing that his time was about to end, he wouldn't even have the time to lift the boy's spirit, simply telling him, "I have to go now. I'm sorry, young man," as he leaps off and Izuku's sitting there just kind of accepts it. He's just like, well, I got my answer. Because remember, originally All Might hadn't answered him, so that's why he latched onto his leg. And with this time having, obviously changed that, that's what takes place. So anyways, with that being the case, as Izuku would start to walk home, suddenly Izuku could hear the sounds of explosions, because I still want that second interaction for the Sludge villain to happen. So even though realistically without Deku grabbing onto his leg it wouldn't, I still kind of want to like plot my way through it. So anyways, with that said, Izuku would hear the noises of explosions, and making his way there, he would recognize that the Sludge villain was there. So as Izuku would rush towards the direction of the Sludge villain, attempting to throw its backpack, Izuku would see that the Sludge villain was actually throwing a tendril. So unconsciously using his quirk, Izuku would dash straight into the Sludge villain, starting to actually choke himself, with Bakugo like screaming out, shooting explosions, being like, "Damn! Deku, why would you?" Before he could even finish that sentence, Izuku would be right back to before he had dashed, the Sludge villain looking at the boy and saying, "So that's it, you do have a quirk. And it's an annoying one at that." However, as Izuku would be standing there thinking to himself, like, what can I freaking do? Even though now I know that I have a quirk, and he'd be like, I have a quirk. He's also, his mind's racing because of different things. There's a villain, his literal childhood hero is right there being trapped, and he just literally realized he has a freaking quirk. All that Izuku's wanted his whole life. So he would freeze up in this moment, and as All Might would arrive and defeat the Sludge villain, he would turn to the boy telling him that what he did was dangerous, which then would lead the media to scolding Izuku and Izuku to make his way home, with Bakugo once again being like, "I didn't need your help, Deku," and Izuku just kind of standing there being like, "Yeah, I guess he is right, I didn't really help. The heroes are right, I did just get in the way." But as Izuku would finish that thought, he would think, "But I have my quirk. I have a quirk." Izuku would feel tears start running down his face as he would leap up into the air going, "I have a quirk!" People around him kind of staring at him like a lady that would have been walking her dog, as Izuku would run home, rushing to the house going, Mom, I finally awakened a quirk!" As he would look at his mom, who instead of having a proud expression on her face, would have a little bit of like a disappointed look towards Izuku, being worried, going, "Just what makes you think you can lunge into hero incidents? You could have got yourself killed, Izuku!" As she starts crying, he starts crying, and then he ends up telling her that he got a quirk and that he's sorry. She would say that if having a quirk means he was going to be jumping into super dangerous situations, then she doesn't want him to have one. But with Izuku looking down at his mom, he would say that he had to. Kachan was in danger. His body just moved on its own. He didn't think that he was going to. And so with Inko hearing that, she would say, "I understand, but please never worry me like that again." So with Izuku looking at his mom and just like nodding, the two of them would just smile at each other, with Izuku saying that now that he has a quirk, there is a chance for him to actually get into UA. Before, he had tried to get in via the general studies or something, but with this, he could genuinely have an opportunity to become a hero. And so Izuku would be taken to the quirk doctor the very next day, where his quirk would be registered as Boss Bandit, seeing as the entire ability is 100% based on her. So yeah, anyways, with Izuku being told what this quirk can do and how it essentially functions, that Izuku doesn't inherently have super speed in the sense that he can't just dash at things, but it has to actually be something that he deems as a full-on enemy, meaning that Izuku can think of a specific building as like an enemy, and he can truly believe in his heart it's an enemy. He could dash towards it, hitting it, and like kind of stay there and like continue trying to bash at it. Or Izuku also has the benefit of dashing back to where he had started, essentially turning back time on himself, which is very cool. But some of you guys might be thinking, okay, Xehther, like that's cool or whatever, but really, like that's the ability that we're running with? We're really using Clash Royale ideas now? Come on now, Unky, like you fell off, like you have no good ideas. I know some of you guys are thinking that, and to you people who do think that, screw you, man. But anyways, the reason that I thought that was because, think about it. If Izuku dashes at somebody with a freaking knife and just stabs them, bro, that could do so much damage because Izuku would essentially have the greatest hit and run quirk that has ever been thought of. It's pretty crazy, and when you add actual weapons to that, the quirk starts to get a lot more insane. However, at the current point in time, Izuku doesn't see that as a viable option because in his eyes, he wants to be a hero. So he doesn't believe in like using knives because what if he freaking kills someone, right? That's not exactly in the hero code of conduct, page 3, right? And he also believes that using guns would be very dangerous in that aspect, so Izuku kind of just crosses off both of those aspects, recognizing that though they probably would make his quirk very, much more useful, the deadliness of that would be kind of insane. So refraining from using his quirk in such a manner, Izuku decides that the best course of action would probably be to learn some sort of martial arts, and in Izuku's case, he would think that the best bet that he probably has as of now would probably be like boxing. So for the next 10 months, Izuku would attend a boxing class 3 times a week and also for the remainder days go to the gym. So Izuku would start to build up his physique a little bit, eat proper foods, do a bunch of research, watch a whole bunch of Jesse James Zest, I hope you guys know who that is, as he just kind of sits there and like gets stronger, grows a lot more confident, makes up ideas for his quirk, even starts drawing up his little pro hero costume, and Izuku just starts changing a lot. Like there's just a joy in his eyes, which Bakugo would definitely hate. But seeing as we have no real like showings that Bakugo would have been bullying Deku over the course of those 10 months, I'm going to say that he doesn't. And so the 10 months would be over and eventually Izuku would be prepared to take the UA entrance exam. He would walk inside tripping as Uraraka would catch him as usual, and once inside of the testing area, Izuku would start muttering like crazy, leading to the Ida interaction, and then the practical exam, which in this timeline you might be thinking, oh yeah, Izuku's about to become a hero, this man's about to pass, he's been doing boxing, he's been training his body, but let me just inform you guys, Izuku had no clue that he was going to be facing off against robots, and since he had a quirk and doesn't believe in fighting with weapons or stuff like that, he goes in there trying to literally fight against robots with decent powered punches, meaning that Izuku has to literally punch at these metal robots that, granted he would probably leave some dents on, but at the end of the day, Izuku, if he's lucky, would manage to get like 2 robots, and that was him putting in all of his effort, dashing, dodging the blow that the robot would throw, dashing, dodging again, dash, landing multiple blows, and then like retreating. Like he has to do all that. And at that point, he still only managed to defeat like 3 robots, getting like what? 6 points? Let's say that it was like 7 or 6 points just to be generous, but still, you get what I'm trying to say. Like this quirk that Izuku has isn't necessarily suited for opponents that have like durability quirks or robots, because it's kind of hard to punch through them with your bare fist. And since Izuku hadn't even considered the thought of using brass knuckles, well, that just made it even tougher. By the end of the test, Izuku's fists would probably have been bleeding with the gloves that he would actually have been wearing, probably being torn, and like his little like flesh parts would be exposed. It's not fun, right? And with the test finally being over, Izuku would sit there thinking to himself like, did I get in? But the more that he would think about things, and really, I mean think about things, Izuku would realize like, I probably still failed. And that realization would hit home because now Izuku doesn't have the excuse of I'm quirkless. No, he is a quirked being. He had the ability to use a quirk and he still wasn't good enough. This would crush Izuku. And the moment that he would actually get his letter to let him know whether he was accepted or not, man, it would crush him even more. Because it's not like he wasn't accepted to UA, he was. He's going to be part of the general course, but he's, once again, part of the general course. Like that's not exactly what Izuku wanted to be. He wanted to be a hero. And at the moment, he's not thinking about the fact that, okay, maybe I can somehow get myself to be part of the, the actual hero course. Like in his mind, he's like, I failed. Like that's all there is to it. And so with him showing that to Inko and her being like, wow, my baby made it to UA. Like, aren't you proud of yourself, Izuku? Izuku would just look at his mom with like just straight sadness in his eyes, you know what I mean? She's like, all right, come on, like let's go celebrate. So they go out to like some restaurant where they would have a nice time, you know, their meals is good and all this stuff. And as the two of them would be leaving, Izuku would hear the sounds of somebody yelling, "Help me! Help me!" So with Izuku hearing these cries for help, he would look at his mom in her eyes and just run off with her yelling, "Izuku!" But he'd be gone. And due to the cardio training that he's been doing in the road work thanks to boxing, Izuku would get there very quickly, where once he would get to an alleyway, he would turn to see the hero killer Stain, being greeted to the scene of the hero killer literally licking the blood off, with the man being paralyzed and saying, "Get out of here, kid. Get lost. He'll kill you too." So with Izuku standing there and being like, dude, like, I want to help, but his legs wouldn't move. But then reflecting back on that failed letter and seeing that somebody in front of him was about to die unless he acted, Izuku brushing everything off, and even though he felt so much tremendous fear, he would dash at Stain, landing a punch square to the face of the hero killer, sending him backwards a bit. Stain, feeling the impact of the blow, would spit out a little bit of blood before turning to the kid and saying, "Not bad, but now try this on," as he would lunge towards Izuku, faking before then appearing right behind him and slashing at like the tendon in Izuku's leg, telling him that now, without a quirk, what plan does he have now? Does he truly believe that he made the right choice in attempting to save this fake hero? But as Izuku would look up, blade having slashed his leg, gone in, you know, significantly deep to the point where he can't use it for at least like a day or two, Izuku would look at the hero killer and just through gritted teeth think to himself that he's not gonna just let someone die, and dash straight at Stain before he even had the chance to lick the blade. Stain realizing that even without his other leg, he was still literally dashing at him, and as Izuku would go in to throw the blow, Stain would grab him by the arm, slam him on the ground, and stare at him straight in the eyes as he would ask him what his convictions are, questioning the boy on whether that piece of scum over there was truly worth ending his own life over. And Izuku would yell back that he would risk his life to save anyone in danger. Villain, hero, scumbag, it didn't matter to him because that's the essence of being a hero. And Stain hearing that and seeing the look in Izuku's eyes, even faced with death, he never once dropped his heroic heart. Stain would let the boy go, telling him that now, and only now, was he going to allow the boy to leave, because if he didn't, he would wish he had. But as Izuku would sit there now once again staring at the hero, he would then once more dash towards Stain, attempting to throw another punch, and with Stain about to literally counter Izuku would dash back, dashing back in, catching Stain off guard, being like, what? He can do that? But before Izuku would even have the chance to literally land the blow, Stain at the very last second at the point of contact would counter him using his elbow, with Izuku like feeling the blow straight in his fist, which mind you still was healing from his whole like little practical exam section that he would have taken at UA, and landing this blow on Stain's elbow would stun him, so he wouldn't be able to use his ability to dash backwards. This would give Stain just enough time to smack Izuku on the back of the neck, knocking him out on the ground. And as Stain would stare down at that fake hero, he would aim his blade towards him, telling him that if he doesn't resign within the next day, that he will find him again, as he would disappear with the boy, dragging the unconscious Izuku to his current base of operations. And all the while this would be happening, we would have Inko frantically calling the police, with them eventually finding the pro hero that was still paralyzed by Stain, and him informing that the boy was taken by the hero killer. This news would practically cause Inko to go into a straight up coma, all the while Izuku would wake up a few hours later inside of this like strange area, chained up. Izuku would look around being like, where am I? As he would then see Stain, who at the moment would be nearby a sink, cleaning the blood off of his blades. Noticing that Izuku had woken up, he would get closer towards him before asking him one simple question. What does it mean to be a hero? Izuku would think about this, going, being a hero means rescuing others and putting others above yourself. It's being a public servant. But But Stain, at hearing this, would throw a blade straight at the direction of Izuku's cheek, with it nicking him. Stain would stare at him, telling him that that's not it. Back then, heroes were true. They were real. They would save people without being compensated. They would put their lives on the line even when the government wouldn't allow that. That is a true hero. And earlier you gave me a better response. A hero is someone who meddles when they don't have to. Izuku, then remembering the words that came out of his mouth, would then stare at Stain, asking why he's here. Stain would tell him that he has a useful quirk, and he intends to make him a true hero. As Izuku, hearing this, would be stunned, going, "You're gonna make me a true hero? What does that even mean?" But as Stain would get closer, he would tell the boy that he has potential and that quirk of his can be used to save countless lives. However, that fighting style, that sloppiness, that determination to get injured when he doesn't have to, all of those are wrong. And he's gonna beat it into him how to be a proficient hero, even if he has to kill the boy 10 times over. So with Izuku hearing this, he would look at the hero killer feeling fearful, but also recognizing the fact that the hero killer is a formidable opponent. Izuku would tell him that he doesn't want to train with a murderer, and Stain would tell him that he's not. He's training under an agent of justice, someone who's fighting to bring back the truth of the word hero. And as Izuku would hear that, he would recognize that whether he wants to train with Stain or not, he's going to. So Stain, undoing Izuku's bindings, would tell the boy to attempt to run away. That is going to be his goal. And with Izuku running around, seeing this gigantic, abandoned warehouse looking thing with all the exits boarded off, he would realize that Stain's psychopathic literal attempt to train him is going to be trapping him in this freaking cage until he can either kill him and escape or defeat him in a fight. And that's gonna take ages. He's gonna be stuck here with no water or food or anything. And all that he has to try to fight against him are some knives and daggers? This guy's insane, Izuku would think. He would tell him that, being like, "I won't be able to beat you in a fight. You destroyed me the last time." But Stain would reply by telling him that he can and he will. That with that quirk of his, he should be able to defeat him and run circles around his opponent. So with Izuku hearing this and recognizing that unless he literally is able to do this, he's not going to be seeing the sunlight of day, Izuku would grab at a dagger, holding it towards the direction of Stain and lunging towards him with a dash. He would try to slash at Stain, which Stain would narrowly manage to dodge, kicking Izuku square in the chest, sending him crashing into the ground. As Izuku would hit the ground, he would go just trying to gasp for air. All the while, Stain would stand over him with the blade to his throat, telling him to do better, move faster, swing the blade with conviction, boy. If you don't, I promise you will never see the light of day. So Izuku, hearing that, recapturing the air in his lungs, he would stand back up and once again rush at Stain, blitzing in, dashing back, blitzing in, dashing back, blitzing in, dashing back, so many times that he's literally looking like Gran Torino at this point. And with Stain not even able to recognize when the strike was gonna come, suddenly Izuku with the war cry would go, "Ah!" Like faking Stain as though he was about to slash in, his eyes full of this conviction of I'm gonna do it. And with Stain trying to parry, boom, Izuku would appear right to his side as he would plunge the blade into Stain's body. At this, the hero killer would smile, dragging the blade out and tossing it into the ground, with Izuku picking it back up. Stain would tell him to do it again, and this time, finish the job. And with Izuku hearing this, he would stare at Stain going, "But you're injured, you won't be able to..." But Stain would say, "Did I stutter? Finish the job." So Izuku, recognizing that Stain is literally trying to get killed at this moment, or at least he thinks he is, obviously Stain isn't, because he's not just gonna let himself die, right? He would think to himself that he's not going to do that. And so, blitzing towards the direction of Stain, blitzing back, blitzing towards and blitzing back, he would eventually take a step back every time that he goes backwards, meaning that the range of his dash is increasing with every single time that he rushes at Stain, meaning his quirk is literally improving as we speak. And with that happening, eventually Essentially 40 feet of space would be separating himself and Stain, as Izuku would make a run for the door and try to like pretty much like stab at like the little lock that was holding it to break it and just exit. So with Stain recognizing this, he would instantly lick the blade of Izuku's blood, as Izuku would feel the paralyzation effect overtake him, falling to the ground, him asking Stain why. Why is he so intent on dying? Is this where he would want his grave to be? Doesn't he have a mission? A conviction? But Stain, as he would drag the boy by his leg straight to the center, not caring about the damage that he was causing to Izuku's face or body, he would tell him that he wasn't planning on dying, that at the moment Izuku's strike would have landed, he would have paralyzed them all the same. Izuku, recognizing that Stain isn't an idiot in this moment, would realize that maybe he had taken Stain all wrong, and as Stain would have him just laying there in the middle, still paralyzed for the next like 2 minutes, Stain would literally patch up his wound, like using some cloth and like some alcohol, as you would hear him like kind of like scream a little bit, before then standing back up, grabbing 2 katanas and then throwing one towards Izuku. And once Izuku would stand back up, Stain would tell him to fight him with that. So Izuku, picking up the blade, would go to dash, but Stain would tell him that if he uses his dash for this section of the training, he'll kill him. So Izuku, realizing like, okay, I'm not gonna dash, would just rush towards Stain, normally attempting to slash at him. Stain dodging every blow, just being like sloppy, too slow, uncoordinated. Are you kidding me? That's not even a slash, until he eventually like kicks Deku square in the chest once more, knocking the dude to the ground, once again having no air, as he would stomp on his freaking chest, being like, come on, you mean to tell me that that's the best you've got? Have you never wielded a blade before? So Izuku, like kind of like standing back up, would be like, I've never wielded a blade. How in the world am I supposed to know how to fight with something that I've never used? So Stain would say, very well, what are you proficient in? As Izuku would tell him that he's better at boxing. Would Stain be like, martial arts, okay. He would drop all of his blades and everything, telling Izuku to come at him, proceeding to beat this man to a pulp. He would tell him that even his best is his worst, explaining to Izuku that a hero with no conviction and no desire to truly do what it takes to defeat a villain is no hero at all. Asking Izuku a simple question: do you believe that when faced off with a villain, they won't try every and any tactic in order to defeat you? Do you think that they're holding back when facing off against you? No, they're trying to kill everything and everyone around them. And for what? For their own selfish purposes. This hero society is garbage, and I plan to fix everything. And as Izuku would sit there, like literally the next day, Izuku would be sitting there panting, gasping for air, having literally been beaten beyond a pulp. Like, this dude's left eye can barely open, and his other eye had like a bruise on it because Stain had punched that one too. Not to mention he had that gash on his cheek, he had a couple of slashes on his body, and as Izuku would try to weakly stand up, he would just keel over, falling to the ground unconscious. Waking up a few hours later, Izuku would find himself all patched up, Stain asking him to think about his words, to truly think about them. So with Izuku laying on that bed, just realizing like, damn, like he might be right. Like, have I been too much of a coward to really just implement blades into my fighting style? Do I really not have what it takes to take a villain down if that's the only choice? Izuku, thinking about that, would think to himself that it's never okay to take the life of another person. And as Izuku would be thinking that, Stain would be out, literally doing exactly that, killing people. So it's Izuku like kind of just like laying there on this like very uncomfortable bed. He would attempt to try to escape, but crawling on the ground and like attempting his best would barely get him to the door. So by the time that his Stain would return, he would say that he figured that with this much time, he might have at least been outside of the warehouse. But he truly is pathetic. Throwing a blade directly into Izuku's hand that wouldn't pierce all the way through, but definitely does cut some like veins and stuff. Izuku would have that patched up, as Stain would tell him to take this, forcing like this like drug that is very much so legal, that enhances healing but also kind of like messes with the person's psyche. As Izuku taking it would feel his body start to heal. It kind of has like similar effects to Recovery Girl's Quirk, but that like side effect is no joke, bro. Like it genuinely turns normal people like low-key insane. So with Izuku taking that, like his mind would low-key start shifting a little bit, like growing a bit darker, I guess you could say. They're like mind-altering drugs that also have a side effect of crazy healing. But yeah, no, once that would take place, Izuku would tell Stain to come at him. All the pain in his body not allowing Izuku to stand up, but he would do so holding a dagger out in front of him, saying that he's not done. And so, dashing towards the direction of Stain, attempting to stab him, Stain would, pretty much parry the attack, sidestepping him, grabbing the blade, saying that's more like it, telling him to rest up, that tomorrow they'll pick this up. So this would mark the third day that Izuku's been gone, meaning that by now, Izuku should have already had his first day at UA High. But due to the fact that he literally got kidnapped, the boy would be stuck with the psychopath Stain and going at it once again the very next day, meaning like the first day of Izuku at UA, because it would now be Monday. Izuku and Stain would truly be going at it. Stain impressed with Izuku's improvement, his movements, since Izuku would have done that via watching Stain's movements. He's kind of like trying to implement the things that he can see Stain doing, and it's working. Stain would recognize that on top of having a very good quirk, this boy seems to have an incredibly analytical mind, would smile, recognizing that his plan to form this hero into a true hero in his eyes is already working. Because at the moment that he heard Izuku's conviction and saw that his quirk had so much potential, way more than his in fact, he would think that maybe if he could hone this boy and teach him how to fight, how to truly be a symbol of, justice or wicked justice in his eyes, then he could technically start up the revival of a real hero, you know what I mean? Like, instead of letting this boy go off and be a stereotypical, do-goody, he could be what is really needed. A deterrent, someone capable of doing what has to be done when a situation calls for it. And with Stain smiling and recognizing that Izuku's skills were improving tremendously, would start upping the training. Now, instead of focusing on his swordsmanship, more so focusing on his quirk, with a very difficult task. Stain would make his way outside, grabbing about 100 leaves that he would have ripped off of trees and throwing 10 up into the air at the same time. He would task Izuku with the goal of cutting each of these in half. Izuku would be like, what? That's impossible. Even with my quirk, I won't be able to move that fast. But Stain would tell him that that's because he hasn't pushed the boundaries of what a quirk can truly do. But now he will. So throwing the leaves up into the air, he would watch on as Izuku would attempt to slash it just once, one leaf. But Izuku was completely unable to just dash at the leaf itself, with Stain questioning Izuku why he's unable to use his quirk against that. Izuku going on to explain to him that according to the doctors, Izuku should only be able to dash at people or, enemies. And Stain hearing that would nod, saying that he understands. He simply needs to believe that those leaves are his enemy. So lunging to the direction of Izuku and putting him to the ground, Stain would drive his dagger right to the neck of Izuku, or right next to where it would be, as he would tell Izuku to picture this and manifest the anger and rage and negative emotions that he feels every time that Stain drives a dagger into him, every time he kicks him in the chest, every time he stops him from going to school and meeting his mother. And Izuku, getting this look in his eyes of anger, would nod as he would stand back up, and Stain would watch as he would toss the leaves up into the air, and Izuku would close his eyes, picturing that Stain was at exactly each one of those locations. However, Izuku would only be able to do it with one leaf, his concentration wavering. Stain would tell him that he's gonna do this until he can hit all of them, and even then, that's only step one of the training. So with Izuku looking back towards Stain, he would nod his head, acknowledging that he's going to do it. And for the entirety of the day, going into the next day, no food, no water, no rest, no nothing, Izuku does it over and over and over and over until it literally becomes muscle memory. Izuku finally was able to learn how to picture something as if it was like a person or a human. So he's able to bypass that limitation that he had before. And so Izuku would manage to dash, return to the spot before he dashed, dash again, dash, like a zigzag kind of dash, like a boom, 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 to each one of the leaves, cutting them all right before the final leaf could hit the ground. And with Izuku having finally completed that, Stain would tell him, good, now he has to cut them into fourths. So with Izuku realizing this, he would straight up just pass out, being like, "You're kidding," as he falls to the ground, with Stain catching him at the last second, placing him on a bed where he would put like some random like food that will probably like wake up cold the next day, and a glass of water right next to Deku. As that would happen, the hero killer would go out and do his usual mission of, hero killing. So with that said, with the next day rolling around and Izuku eating his breakfast, lunch, and dinner pretty much, and like a fat cup of water, this man would stand back up, making his way to the center of the gigantic warehouse, where Izuku, upon recognizing that Stain wasn't even there, he would decide that he's not gonna leave until he truly does master this. Because as much as he hates being away from his mother and potentially missing these days at UA, what Izuku would hate more than that is for him not to be able to become a hero. So, throwing up 20 leaves into the air, Izuku would start practicing his attack with that, with him reaching a point of beyond exhaustion where Izuku's body was practically just moving on its own now. Like right there at that level of collapsing, his body just kind of like standing up as it's like barely managing to function, but it's doing the bare minimum. It's just breathing and using his quirk and doing one slashing motion. It's become that easy for Izuku. The amount of repetitions that he's done with this one move are actually insane. And with that being the case, Izuku, by the time that Stain would enter the door, he would watch on as 20 leaves would be cut into fourths, meaning that Izuku would land a grand total of 40 slashes before the leaves could hit the ground. This would heavily impress Stain, who, staring at the boy, would watch on as he would kind of slash at the final one, and his body just collapses to the ground. Him like, I did it. Did you see that, Stain? As Stain would look at the boy, telling him that he's impressed. He thought that would have taken him 2 weeks at least. So, with Izuku passing out, the very next day he would find himself waking up in an alley, literally inside of like a dumpster, which was filled with a bunch of packing peanuts and stuff like that. As Izuku would wake up, seeing the sun hitting his face, realizing damn, I hadn't seen sunlight in so many days. As he gets up, recognizing, wait, I'm not in the... Looking around to try to see Stain, only to feel a blade that was left on his chest. Not embedded into him, obviously, but kind of on top of it. As Izuku would grab the blade, there's no note, there's no goodbye or well done on your training. He was just literally left there in a dumpster. And with Izuku getting up weekly and definitely feeling the impact of training, since the man did literally just go through hell and back for the last 2 weeks since he's been missing. And with Izuku now getting back up, he would kind of walk weekly towards where the normal people are, where he would once again kind of be limping and stuff like that, falling to the ground, with the hero finally finding him, which would, for this instant, I'm gonna be saying is Fat Gum, and Fat Gum picking him up and taking him to the police station is where they would identify him as Izuku Midoriya, who at this point would be wearing the same exact change of clothes that he would have been wearing with Inko when they went out that night, looking significantly battle damaged. The boy had gone through a lot. There's a lot of injuries, mind you. So Izuku would sit there in the hospital and he's kind of beep, beep, beep. We have Inko right next to him crying. She's like, my baby, how could this have happened to you? Tell me what monster did this to you? With Izuku kind of opening his eyes again, his IV fluids having been pumped into him and stuff like that. He wakes up, his stomach's growling, and he just looks around. He sees his mom. She gives him the biggest hug. She's crying. She's like, I thought I lost you. She's crying like crazy. And Izuku's like, Mom, I'm okay, but you're crushing my rib. As she gets off and she's like, I'm so sorry. She calls the nurse. She's like, nurse, he's awake. Give him some food. My baby's hungry. And so he gets fed and gets water. And then the police enters the room, Officer Tsukachi. And once he's in the room, he would ask Izuku what happened. Izuku, looking at the man, unwilling to give out the information about the hero killer, would simply say that he was kidnapped by somebody. He can't remember who. He was drugged the whole time, he would say. So with Tsukachi hearing that, he would say, okay, is there anything you can tell us at all about the location? Izuku would say that it was fuzzy, it was dark, and every now and then he would be forced to fight against people. He would say that he didn't understand it. But with Tsukachi hearing these reasonings, he would tell everybody to exit the room, as he would go on to tell the boy that he understands and can recognize when someone is telling a half-truth. So he would then go on to inform him that whatever the reason is for him not snitching or like telling him who his true capturer was, he doesn't know. But for other people's sake, he should tell the truth. But Izuku would look at him, telling him that he doesn't know what he's talking about, telling him that he's just an injured kid and he would like to get back to resting. So with Tsukachi hearing that, he would nod, telling him that he understands, and if he ever feels like telling him what exactly really happened, to call this number. Izuku, taking the card and looking at it, would simply crumple it up as Inko re-enters the room, and Izuku would be, pretty much released from the hospital a couple of hours later, seeing as the only thing that he really needed was proper rest, food, and hydration. So, with Izuku's injuries now mostly being healed, Izuku the very next day would find himself back at school, having missed the first week and a half. And with him entering the classroom, the teacher would present him as Izuku Midoriya. Izuku walking in, saying hello to everybody, and sitting next to a purple-haired boy by the name of Hitoshi Shinso. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, so we had left off with Izuku finally arriving at UA, and the way that I believe that I want this story to play out is to have some sort of relationship build up between Shinso and Izuku, because obviously we know that Shinso goes to the general course, so I figured maybe I could have Shinso have some interesting part of the story in this timeline, just because honestly I really do believe that Shinso's quirk needs to get more usage, and due to the way that Izuku's works and Shinso works, I think they could make for a really interesting dynamic duo. So anyways, once Izuku would be brought into the classroom, the teacher would say, "Alright everybody, pay attention," as out of nowhere he would have Izuku Midoriya walk inside, walking in with a couple of scars, not looking at all like he belongs there, because during his time with Stain, Izuku would have actually cut his hair a bit shorter than he wears in the original, because his hair kept getting in his eye, pretty much blocking his point of view, and if he can't see anything, then how in the world is he supposed to teleport to you, right? So yeah, the dude cut his hair. Anyways, as Izuku would enter the classroom and he would sit down, right next to him would be Hitoshi Shinso. Izuku would look at the paper and be like, damn, I really did fall behind, realizing that they are significantly into this course and that he missed the entire introduction section. Feeling the effects of this, he would think to himself, damn it, Stain, as suddenly he proceeds to just lock in and be like, alright, I'm gonna catch up even if it takes me all week. So yeah, for the next 2 days, Izuku's just locked in doing his work. He's kind of staying silent, not getting in anybody's way, until one day, as Shinso could tell that Izuku was definitely struggling with the material, he would turn to him asking him if he needs some help. Izuku would look towards Shinso and nod, saying that admittedly he does. So Shinso, looking at Izuku, would smile before then telling him that he didn't mind helping him. And so, showing him a couple of his notes, he would clear up Izuku's misconception about it, because up to this point he had been the one teaching himself, trying to figure out any way possible to actually solve the equation. But with Shinso explaining it better, he was like, oh, that makes sense. He's like, I don't know how I didn't see that. And so Shinso's like, yeah, it's not that hard actually. After this, Izuku would thank Shinso, and to this, Shinso would finally ask a question. Hey, I don't mean to be rude, but is there a particular reason why you chose to go to the general course? You don't really look like you belong here. Izuku, looking towards Shinso, would tell him that honestly, he didn't want to be part of the general course. He wanted to become a hero, but since he really has no other choice, this is what he has to stick to for now. And Shinso, hearing that, would nod, saying that he has about the same story. Going on to explain that his quirk, to put it lightly, is not exactly best suited for handling robots. Izuku, hearing that, would go on to ask Shinso what his quirk is, and Shinso would be like, my quirk, but before he could answer that question, the teacher would be like, you two, stop talking! So Izuku and Shinso would kind of look at each other, with Izuku looking towards him and saying, why don't we talk about this after class? I mean, I don't mind. It's not like it's not like I'm sitting next to anybody at lunch. And Shinso would nod, telling him sure thing. So for that lunch period, Shinso would walk over towards where Izuku's at, normally towards the left side of a table that's full with a little group of friends that don't really mind Izuku sitting there, seeing as he doesn't say anything and doesn't seem to pay attention to their convos. So as Shinso would go over towards him, sit down, he would tell him that his name is Hitoshi Shinso once again, with Izuku saying, I know, and I'm Izuku. Alright, well, can we pick off? What's your quirk? I've honestly been pretty interested by it. Shinso would go on to explain that his quirk is called Brainwash, with Izuku's eyes both widening, going, wait, You can brainwash people? There's so many uses for that quirk, it's actually insane. Wow, you were blessed with an amazing quirk. Shinso hearing that would be like, what? Not used to hearing that. Normally people say he has a villainous quirk or that. There's no way somebody can be a hero with a quirk like that, but Izuku, his eyes, like, yeah, they look a bit jaded, but he looks so genuine at the same time. And this is when Shinso would go on to explain that in order to activate his quirk, he essentially needs to ask people a question, and so long as he wills them to be placed under his mind control, that's all it takes. Izuku would look to him, telling him that he wants to know how it feels, so he would tell Shinso, place me under your mind control. Shinso at hearing that would be like, what, you're kidding? And Izuku would say, I'm not, I genuinely want to see what it's like. After this, Shinso would proceed to do just that, and after asking Izuku a question like, what is your name? And Izuku replies, Izuku. After that, it's wraps. Izuku could feel his body just feel strange, as though he has no control over it. And at this, Izuku would look around at this infinite void that he can see. He can feel his hands, he can feel his legs, but his motor functions, they're all gone. Shinso would tell him, raise your hand. Izuku would do just that, and then Shinso would snap him right out of it. At this, Izuku would be stunned, with a million ideas popping up into his head of the multiple uses that Shinso could have with his quirk. He would go on to tell him that genuinely he has a phenomenal quirk, and when it comes to the type of hero he could be, he's gonna be phenomenal at busting down secret crime organizations by infiltrating inside. It's a great quirk. Hearing that, Shinso would start to like slightly, like blush a little bit, not in a gay way though, as he looks towards Deku and he's all like, well, what's your quirk? As we would see Deku looking to Shinso and telling him that his quirk is called Dash. Shinso at this would think, oh, so it's a super speed augmenting quirk, to which Izuku would look at him telling him something like that, with Shinso replying, what is that supposed to mean? But Izuku would tell him that the next time they find themselves in an empty hallway, he'll show him what he's talking about. Shinso with this would raise an eyebrow when suddenly, beep, 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 the alarm system would go off at UA. So with everybody beginning to freak out and trying to leave the cafeteria, Izuku would wonder what the heck's going on. So, acting fast, Izuku would dash towards the direction of the cafeteria lady right behind her, and the moment he would appear, Izuku would grab a knife before dashing towards the direction of the kid all the way in the back so as to not be noticed. Shinso, noticing that Izuku was gone, would look around, then seeing Izuku running towards the opposite direction, watching him literally run up the stairs, as Izuku would make his way towards the roof, where he would notice that the only thing going on was that reporters were trying to get inside of UA. But as Izuku would think about that, he would think, but why would reporters? How? There's no way that they should be able to bypass UA's security system. And then, from an upwards view, Izuku would notice a man with blue hair, standing behind the wreckage of everything, a hand covering his face, and Izuku, attempting to catch a glimpse of him, would use his dash quirk to dash towards the direction of a nearby reporter. Then, before anybody else could notice him, Izuku would dash towards the direction of the gate, as he would land cleanly out of the field of vision of anybody, and he would be face to face with the villain Shigaraki. The two of them making eye contact would lead Shigaraki to realizing that one of the students caught him. So, in an attempt to decay him before he would leave, he would rush towards the direction of Izuku. However, Izuku, being used to the movement speed of Stain, would find that even though Shigaraki's speed is kind of impressive, would be able to dodge it before plunging his knife straight into one of Shigaraki's hands. At this, he would create some distance by leaping backwards, with Shigaraki dragging the knife out of his hand and saying that he will get him for this. However, as those words leave his mouth, a purple mist would appear, teleporting Shigaraki away, and with Izuku recognizing that the media would catch a glimpse of him, and that would be the worst case scenario, he would quickly look around trying to see if there was anything that he can use his dash quirk on without being spotted. Then, noticing that Shinso was looking out the window, he would tell him to get closer towards that area, and with Shinso just seeing him signaling, like with his hands, he'd be really confused, but Izuku would start jumping up and down, pointing to walk towards that way. So, Shinso, finally understanding, would do just that, making his way towards a nearby window, as Izuku would signal to Shinso to open it. Shinso would understand and attempt to open that window, but he would signal no to Izuku, quickly informing him that that thing was not budging. So Izuku, recognizing this, would take a deep breath in, close his eyes, stare at the news media, before then dashing right towards them and then to the top of the UA roof, Izuku barely making it. He would grab onto the ledge before hurling himself up there and then thinking to himself that now he just has to figure out a way how to get down. So, doing exactly that, sneaking around that area and hoping that he doesn't get caught, Izuku would make his way back down towards the cafeteria, where at this point, the students, all having been calmed down and alerted that it was nothing more than the media, would all be back in their seats, attempting to have a normal lunch. But as Izuku would arrive back, Shinso would say, "So that's your quirk." And Izuku would say, "Yeah, can't say it really helped out much when I was facing off against some robots." And Shinso, looking at him, would say that he understands now, saying that it seems like both of them are two sides of the same coin. Izuku would nod, telling him that he was actually thinking the same thing. And so, as soon as class would end, Izuku, walking over towards Shinso, would ask Shinso exactly what he's been doing to try to train up his quirk. Shinso, confused at this, would say that he hasn't done anything, stunning Izuku, who would genuinely question on why in the world Shinso would do something like that, as he never even once gave it thought as to how he could improve his quirk or use it better on the battlefield in order to save people. And Shinso would say that he hadn't really thought he would get that far if he's being honest. At this, Izuku would facepalm before asking Shinso where's his conviction, covering his own mouth, realizing that he's starting to even sound like him now. At this, Shinso would say, "Conviction?" To which Izuku would tell him that if he has any dream of becoming a hero or helping society in some way, then he needs to train up that quirk, telling Shinso that an ability like that could one day be used to change the world. And so Shinso, hearing that and thinking that there's no way, like his quirk just, it's a villainous quirk at the end of the day. How could a quirk like that truly make a difference? But Izuku, staring at Shinso, would tell him that after school, the two of them could train if Shinso didn't mind. Shinso would look at Izuku, saying that they've only just met and he expects him to go train with him. But Izuku would cut him off, telling him that he not only expects Shinso there, but that he knows he'll be there. And then, when the time would come, Shinso would appear, as we would watch the boy kicking some trash that would be covering the beach, all the while Izuku would tell Shinso that this is where they're going to be training. Shinso, at hearing this, would ask Izuku why in the world they would want to train somewhere covered in so much trash. And Izuku would tell him, because not only is this going to help you work on your stealth, but it's also going to serve as the perfect spot for me to work on my own quirk. Before he would then speed blitz Shinso, punching him square in the gut, sending him to the ground. At this, Shinso would cough out, going, "How am I expected to win a fight if I can't even use my quirk on you?" And at this, Izuku appearing right in front of Shinso with his fist to his face, just an inch before he made contact, he would stop, telling him that that's the point of this training. How does Shinso plan on fighting an opponent that he won't be able to use his quirk on? And Shinso, hearing this, would widen his eyes, realizing that Izuku was right. He hadn't thought about that, because he thought it was impossible. But Izuku, offering a hand towards Shinso, would tell him that that's the exact same question he had to contend with. That is, until somebody helped him along his way. And Shinso, hearing this, would ask Izuku who, but Izuku would simply say that that's not important, going on to explain to Shinso that whatever it takes to win a fight is what he has to be willing to do. There's gonna be people out there who aren't gonna reply to your quirk because either they know what's coming or they simply couldn't be bothered because they're attempting to kill him. And Shinso, recognizing that things won't be all sunshine and rainbows, would look at Izuku, telling him that he needs to find a way to do it, but how? He's weak, he's never done any training, and his physical stats are, well, average if we're being real. Izuku, hearing this, would tell him that his physical stats aren't the craziest thing either, but he's made do with what he has. So, at this, Izuku would proceed to start beating down on Shinso, using his dash quirk to catch him off guard. And just to put into perspective how this would be, imagine like Gran Torino is rushing you, using the walls, just hitting you over and over and over and over and over. That one Gran Torino scene where like Izuku gets to his apartment, that's pretty much what's happening, but he's actually landing the blows. Shinso eventually finds himself on the ground and eventually getting desperate, grabbing at a pipe but swinging at the air, nearly making contact with Izuku, if not for that lucky ability of dashing back to where he had been. So, Shinso would miss, and Izuku would stop his onslaught momentarily, telling him, "Attaboy," going on to explain to him that that's the attitude you have to have if you really want to win a fight against him. And as Shinso would start grabbing weapons, knives, even bottle glass shards to try to attack at Izuku, Izuku would dodge all of them, Shinso eventually getting tired, saying that he's sick of this, that of course he's not going to hit Izuku. Look at his freaking quirk. It's impossible to hit something that isn't there. So Izuku, realizing this, would go on to stop using his quirk, telling him that maybe he did take things a bit too far. Shinso on the ground, now bloodied and beat, would look at Izuku, telling him where in the world he learned these training methods. Izuku would stop, looking up into the sky, as he would ask Shinso what he believes happened to him while he was gone during that first week of school. Shinso would tell him that he doesn't know, and Izuku would tell him that what happened was he was being brutally beaten every single day. At this, Shinso would tell him that just because that happened to him doesn't mean that he feels like going through the same hellish training. But Izuku would tell him that it's not the same hellish training, that compared to the blows that Izuku's landing on him, he's actually having a field day. The blows that were being landed on him were done with knives and blades. So if he thinks that this was rough, just imagine what he had to go through. His injuries didn't just heal up in 1 or 2 days. Normally they would take weeks, but it wasn't like he had the courtesy of taking that time, because he would only have small increments to sleep whenever his body gave out on him. But the moment he could get back up, he was at it again, training, receiving more cuts and gashes, and attempting to swing his arms even when they felt like they were fractured, broken, and splintered at every angle. Shinso, hearing this, would start to get back up, telling him that he gets it, he doesn't have to keep bragging about his training. But Izuku, staring at the eyes of Shinso, would tell him that that's not something he's bragging about. But he did learn one thing, and that was that although training under those conditions might not be the most practical thing, it was mostly efficient. So staring back down at Shinso and offering his hand, he would ask him if he's willing to go through this in order to show the hero course that he belongs there, because very soon enough, as Shinso's probably aware, the sports festival's coming up. And that's going to be their only shot this year at trying to show the higher ups in UA that they're not their typical UA general course students. They belong in the hero course. So Shinso, standing back up, would tell Izuku that though he hates it, he'll do it, but telling him to chill out at least. Izuku would smile, telling him that he'll try, as he would get into a combat position and tell Shinso to come at him. At this, the boys would spar the entire rest of the night, and the next day they would show up in class both looking extremely tired, with Izuku being the only one who looks as though he can function just fine, but Shinso, yeah, he was passing out mid-class all the time. So with Izuku sitting right next to him, being there to wake him up, he would do just that. And here's where I would like to take a break to explain some things. Now, some of you guys might be thinking, yo, isn't Izuku's personality changing drastically way too quickly? And also, whoa, how did Izuku get that strong like at fighting hand to hand? Y'all gotta remember, man, this man had these lessons beaten into him by the hero killer Stain. This man went through 2 weeks of literal hellish training, which, in my opinion, would harden anybody, especially anime protagonists who seem to get so much stronger with these little 1 week time skips. It's actually crazy, but yeah, no, that's my explanation for all this. Anyways though, jumping back into the story, this would continue until eventually the final class would be over and the bell would ring. At this, the students would all be getting ready to go, with the teacher telling them that they have urgent news to discuss, going on to explain that UA was actually just attacked. And with all of the students being shocked at this, being like, what? UA was attacked? They would all go on to learn that a horde of villains had actually attacked the USJ while the hero course was there. And after hearing all of this, Izuku would clench his fist, thinking that it must have been him. He's sure of it. With an ability that allows him to teleport anywhere, he's sure that the villains must have had an easy time breaking in. But knowing that he couldn't publicly say this because then they would know that he has some connection towards knowing what was going on with the villains, Izuku would stay quiet, eventually leading to the 2 boys arriving at their training ground, where Izuku would hand Shinso a caffeinated drink. After drinking this, the 2 of them would go right back at their training, and with Shinso finally passing out from exhaustion, Izuku would start doing his very own training by the trash, teleporting to different piles of garbage and hiding behind them, trying to up his stealth, something that he knows Stain had him beat at. And as Izuku would continue training and training as the hours would pass, eventually he would find an email appearing on his phone, telling Izuku Midoriya that at the earliest time tomorrow, Izuku is expected to appear at UA, telling him that this should take no longer than an hour. And so the very next day, Izuku would do just that, getting a normal outfit, not his UA one, seeing as he won't be partaking in class since the school does technically shut down for a week after the events of the USJ. So with that said, as Izuku would walk into UA, he would be greeted by his homeroom teacher, Present Mike, and Eraserhead, who was only there to erase his quirk, and Present Mike was there to obviously knock him out with a supersonic scream. They would both be very cautious of the boy, and it's at this point that Present Mike giving him a scowl, believing him to be a traitor, and the main reason why the villains actually broke in, thanks to what you guys are about to see. Izuku would walk into a room, Principal Nezu smiling and laughing, going on to say, Izuku Midoriya, just the boy I wanted to see, come, sit. At this, Izuku would do just that, before he would then ask what this is all about. And before Nezu could even answer, Present Mike would slam his hands on the table, saying that this is regarding this matter. And so flipping the screen, they would show that Izuku Midoriya was actually on the roof when everything was going down. Izuku, realizing this, would know that, oh yeah, he might be screwed. He would look down, realizing that he's probably about to get chewed out, and he would then say that he's sorry, to which Present Mike would say, I knew it! I knew we had a traitor at UA. We should lock him up before asking him any more questions. At this, Izuku would say, what? You're gonna lock me up because I was curious about what was going on? Are you kidding me? That's how the school functions? And hearing this, Present Mike would say, we're not locking you up for that. We're locking you up for working with the villains. At this, Izuku would say, okay, you need to relax. I'm not working with anybody. And I wasn't apologizing for being an accomplice. I was apologizing because I thought you brought me in here because you saw me sneak out to find out what was going on. At this, Present Mike would stop before looking at the boy in the eyes and asking him if he believes him to be born yesterday. At this remark, Aizawa would finally say, Mike, calm down. As Nezu would say, now, let's all relax. If what you're telling us is true, then I do believe you will be allowed to exit. But before that, I would like to ask a few questions. Izuku, why was it that you were trying to examine the situation outside? Izuku would go on to look at him, going on to explain that he didn't think that it was natural for the press to have just been able to break in. And so, sneaking around, using his quirk dash to get over there, he would have teleported right next to the reporters, then towards the UA gate, where he would go on to explain that he actually spotted someone, making Aizawa and the rest curious, as he would go on to say that he saw a man with a hand on his face and blue hair. He attempted to attack him, but before he could, he teleported away, lying of course about the fact that he literally stabbed the knife through the dude's hand. And hearing this, Aizawa, looking at the boy, realizing that it looks like he is telling the truth, seeing as he's been through these interrogation sessions multiple times and knows, generally speaking, when people are lying, he would then look towards Nezu, saying that he thinks that the boy is telling the truth. At this, Mike would say that he's lying. He must have been the one to give the info of the USJ to the villains. But at this, Izuku would say, how would a general course student know the affairs of Class 1A? That's ludicrous. And so, Prison Mike, finally calming down, would then look towards Nezu, who would say that that is a good point. He would go on to ask Izuku why he had never said anything about this, with Izuku responding that he didn't exactly feel like getting expelled for that. So with Principal Nezu nodding, closing his eyes, he would say, very well, while I understand your reasoning for not telling us, this does still warrant some sort of punishment. So for the following week, you will be providing janitorial duty under the supervision of either Aizawa or Present Mike. And at hearing this, Izuku would nod, thanking Nezu, before then looking to Present Mike and telling him that if he expects to find out some dirt about him, then to keep trying because he's not going to find anything. Following this, Izuku would then make his way towards the classroom where he would begin his punishment, and he would say nothing about this, simply just wiping, scrubbing, vacuuming, and well, you know the rest. After a few hours would pass, Izuku would finally hear the door open as he would see Principal Nezu alongside Aizawa, with them explaining to Izuku that his 3 hours of community service are all done. So with Izuku picking up the rag that he was using to clean, he would say goodbye to Present Mike as he would exit the room. And so we would then have Aizawa, Nezu, and Present Mike beginning to converse, and we would watch on as Present Mike kind of looks down to the ground and to the side before saying that he doesn't believe the kid is a culprit. At this, Principal Nezu would say, I see, so you've come to the same conclusion as I have. Truth be told, Izuku Midoriya is an exceptional student, and under different circumstances, he would have been in the hero course. However, the test did dictate that we had to choose those who were capable of defeating more robots and got better scores than him. Izuku simply got unlucky. However, we shall not count him out, because with the sports festival coming out, I doubt Izuku Midoriya will sit silently while the rest of Class 1A gets so much more ahead of him. After this, we kind of just jump cut to Izuku in his room after that annoying day that he had just had, and we watch him as he sits there sharpening his blade, eventually putting it back in its sheath, where Izuku would sit back up going to his computer thinking to himself that he needs to relax, and what better way to do that than to read some manga. So Izuku looks up whether his brand new favorite chapter of manga just dropped, and luckily for him, it did. In fact, there was actually selling copies at a nearby store. So with Izuku grabbing his hoodie and a couple of things, he would tell his mother Inko that he was heading out. However, at this, Inko would get between her son and the door, telling Izuku that she didn't want her baby to go out at night. But Izuku would tell her that he'll be fine. He's just gonna run to the corner store. It's 5 minutes away on foot, and he'll be right back, he promises. What happened that night was definitely not the best, but he's home, he's safe, and he promises, holding her hand, that he'll come back. Inko would look at her son teary-eyed as she would say, okay. And after this, Izuku would make his way to the corner store, where upon arriving, Izuku would check out his manga and then finally leave. But this is when something interesting would happen, because with Izuku walking away, suddenly Izuku could hear the screams of a woman, and Izuku, knowing that he was probably going to regret this, half expecting that Stain would be the culprit of this, Izuku would make his way there. One half of him honestly a bit excited to see Stain again and to go at it one more time. However, when Izuku would arrive, he would be shocked that it wasn't Stain. It was actually some random thief who was currently pointing a gun at a woman, a man, and her son. And Izuku, having the heroic heart that he has, would decide that he's going to help. So, at an instant, using his dash quirk, Izuku would close the gap between himself and the criminal, quickly punching the villain square in the gut, sending him crashing into the wall. At this, the villain would be disoriented but not out, as he would aim his gun towards the direction of Izuku, firing. However, just before the bullet could land, Izuku would return to his point of origin before dashing once again at the man and landing one more clean strike at the man's head. At this, he would drop his gun and he would fall limp to the ground, with the small child saying, "Who are you?" And Izuku turning around to reveal what his face looked like, the color of his hair, and even the hoodie that he was wearing, which the boy would think was so cool. He would ask Izuku what his hero name is, and at this, Izuku would tell him that he's not a hero yet, but he will be, ruffling the kid's hair before telling the family that they better get out of here, that at night, this isn't exactly the safest neighborhood. At this, the family would recoup with the man signaling to their child to come along, before he would then just give Izuku a little bit of a head nod, since, this hero society is more used to heroes saving them because it's their duty, and not as much of like, thank you for saving me, you know what I'm trying to say? So yeah, that's pretty much what takes place here. And as Izuku would watch the family walk off, he would feel a feeling of just like, damn, I just saved that family. As thoughts would begin to rush through his mind, and he would think, just imagine what would have become of the situation if I wasn't there. And as these thoughts would start piling through Izuku's head, he would realize that it felt good. It felt like he achieved something. It was instant gratification. And even though he knew this was going to be his life one day, hopefully, so long as his plan goes well, that he didn't have to wait too long, but a part of Izuku didn't want to wait, since after all, he did just save people's lives. But at having this thought, Izuku would kind of shake his head going, no, that's stupid. I can't do that. Before he would then make his way towards the man, realize that he's still knocked out and he should probably call the cops. However, knowing that he would probably have to tell them that he used this quirk in order to save that family, he was going to be getting in trouble. And Izuku not wanting to deal with that, seeing as he's already in trouble at UA, and what would his mom think that he jumped into another incident, Izuku would once again make his way to the corner store, grabbing a little piece of cardboard and writing, "I'm a criminal," as he would tie the man up with a loose piece of rope, and the very next day, the cops would arrive, seeing the gun, the fingerprints of the man, and kind of registering the scene that it was probably a vigilante. They would pretty much write him in, take him into the police car, and the rest. But With that experience now out of the way, Izuku would find himself unable to stop thinking about this while he would train with Shinso, while he would be at home, and with 2 days passing, Izuku would think to himself that maybe he could make a difference in hero society. He didn't have to wait, and since after all he wasn't in the hero course, it's not like he's training to become a hero yet, plus he doesn't know if he'll even be admitted into the hero course. He would think to himself that this is the best way to make a difference now, and regardless of whatever happens, he could always just fall back on this option. And as these thoughts would continue to overwhelm Izuku's mind, as he would make his way home, he would start thinking about his costume, because there's no way that Izuku's gonna go out into the depths of night trying to play vigilante, all the while making it extremely easy for the police to find out who he is. So with that night passing, Izuku would create his first little vigilante costume, and it would be exactly the one that you guys would see on screen. Or, well, technically most likely in the intro picture, or maybe some part of the costume will be in the thumbnail. I'm still not too sure. But regardless of that, Izuku would have a very cool looking and kind of threatening looking costume, which he would put to the test that same night. So after his training with Shinso would finally be over and the sun would finally start coming down, Izuku would say goodbye to his new friend, arriving home, eating some food probably very filled with protein, before then laying in bed telling Inko that he was tired and he was gonna go to bed. After this would happen, Izuku would lay in his bed playing a couple of videos, just for noise, so Inko could believe that maybe he was gonna sleep soon. Eventually, he would turn off the light, turn off the noise, and set up a little bit of a decoy of himself, so Inko, in case she does come in to check on him, would believe that Izuku was soundly sleeping, having, bought like a little wig from the store or something like that. That said, Izuku would crack open his window, leaving just enough space for him to be able to get up there and get down, seeing as he is living on an apartment kind of thing. So if Izuku needs to escape the room, all he needs to do is dash at the ground, and in order to make his way back up top, all he has to do once again is dash to the top. So with this being the case, Izuku grabbing a leaf that he had picked from a tree on his walk home, he would drop it as Izuku would dash straight towards it, remembering the hours of training that he had used with Stain. And so, landing on the ground, Izuku would smile. After this, the young boy would make his way towards a couple of rooftops, and once there, Izuku would start listening in to see if he could hear the cries or screams of people. When he didn't, Izuku would just kind of lay there on top of the roof, looking up into the night starry sky, wondering if what he's doing is idiotic. He's not even part of the hero course, and he's out here trying to play vigilante? Really? Had he changed that much since he trained with Stain? He would start realizing that just a few months ago, there was no way in the world that he would have thought of doing this. In fact, just a few weeks ago, he had given up his hopes entirely on being a hero. But now he was being a vigilante? He would start having some second thoughts. However, this is when Izuku would hear the sound of an explosion. Some villains were currently trying to break into a bank. And seeing this, Izuku had no intention of just letting this happen. Knowing that the heroes were probably 1 or 2 minutes away, he would instantly dash down into the scene, making his way right next to a civilian who was already running away, before making his way straight towards one of the villains who was currently hoisting the heist. So Izuku, immediately dropping an elbow on the man's head, would leave the man completely knocked out, then turning towards his other partners and telling them to give it up. However, when one of them would aim a gun towards him, and the other one would show off his strange quirk that seemingly allowed him to shoot plasma rays from his hand, Izuku would realize that he might have just made a mistake. So dodging the plasma attack as well as the bullet, Izuku would start zipping from here to there, as he would then appear in the middle of both of them, with each of them aiming at each other and shooting themselves. At this, Izuku would stand between the both of them, recognizing that that was pretty damn smart. At the end of the day, he didn't injure them at all. However, as Izuku would be sitting there patting himself on the back, one of the villains, who actually had a golem quirk able to transform himself into a rock-like being, would have grown 3 times his usual size. And Izuku, noticing that, would then watch as the man would swing his arm attempting to hit him, as Izuku would think, crap. He would then zip towards one of the walls, where he would recognize that unless he wraps this up quickly, the heroes are going to arrive, and then he's also going to have to face them. Izuku would think to himself that he has to use it now. So, taking his blade out and rushing at the man, He would cause the man to throw a strike swinging wide, with Izuku teleporting back to his origin point and then blitzing towards him, where Izuku would stab the blade into the man. However, as the blade would make contact, it would become increasingly clear that there was no way he was penetrating that, and he would have to watch on as the golem dude would literally attempt to punch him, Izuku narrowly escaping once again, recognizing that yeah, he has no choice. He has to get lost, but the blade, Stain's blade, he couldn't just leave it there, he would think. However, that's when the sounds of an onlooker would say, "The heroes have arrived for backup," and Izuku would recognize that it's about time he leaves. So using his quirk, he would appear right behind the woman before using his quirk to zip between multiple people, eventually leaving that area entirely and appearing on a rooftop where Izuku would watch on from afar, seeing the way the heroes handle the situation, eventually watching on as one specific person would arrive that Izuku recognizes, Aizawa. He would use his quirk erasure ability to completely render the man useless, with Izuku being stunned. That's Eraserhead, he would think, all the while watching the man fall to the ground and the blade doing so as well. Izuku thinking to himself that he's pretty damn lucky he washed off the fingerprints before he actually went to that fight. So, as Izuku would sit on top of that rooftop, he would think that he did do something good tonight. Next time, he just needs to be more careful in his execution. And so arriving back in his room, Izuku would think to himself that that was a close one, but now that Stain's weapon is gone, what's he going to use for combat purposes? This thought would linger with Izuku, with him thinking to himself maybe he could use a baseball bat, since after all, using that and appearing randomly and hitting people over the head, I mean, hey, that's a pretty viable strategy. But Izuku would think, no, that's just not cool enough. A bat, really? That's the best I got? He would think brass knuckles would be cool, and well, yeah, he's gonna implement brass knuckles or some sort of glove that will probably be very durable. He starts to think about the fact that there's not too many places he could get stuff like that. But wait, the general course. Izuku, one's class would be enlisted once more, and we would finally get to the oh so precious Monday, would make his way towards the general course lab, where once there, he would go on to request some sort of support item that could allow him to have better chances during the sports festival. And Mei Hatsume hearing this would say, "You mean to tell me you need something made?" As Izuku's like, "Yeah, I was hoping I could get some gloves that could act as brass knuckles to make my relatively weak punches hit harder and maybe shock charge them with electricity or something like that." And her hearing this would just be like, "All right, I'll whip up a baby for you," as she quickly proceeds to throw random scrap together and make him this strange glove that actually electrocutes himself. Izuku would then go on to say that he wants something useful, as Mei would say, "Well, that's how things go. I'll see if I can make you a baby in time for the UA Sports Festival." Izuku with this would nod, smiling, saying that he hopes so, as honestly leaving the room, he would have hoped that the other guy would have taken care of that for him, but what else is he gonna expect? It's not like he's full priority since he's part of the general course. And so with this, Izuku would make his way back to the classroom, where he would notice that Shinso wasn't there. So walking around in the hallways wanting to find him, he would actually notice that Shinso was outside of class 1A. And Izuku wondering what exactly he planned to do there, he would watch on as Shinso would make his declaration against class 1A with a smile on his face. That is, until he would see Katsuki Bakugo walking out of the room, as with a chuckle he would say, "So I guess you did make UA. And to top that all off, you even managed to survive your little encounter with a villain. If I was there was no way that would have happened to you." But Izuku hearing that, instead of being fearful like he usually is, he would reply, "Yeah, because you probably would have ended up being caught by the sludge monster, right?" Bakugo at hearing this would cringe before looking back at Izuku, stopping and saying, "The hell is that? Damn nerd." As Izuku would say, "You heard me, Kachan, and you may as well keep walking before I embarrass you in front of your classmates." And Bakugo hearing this would turn towards him, ready to blast an explosion towards him, until Aizawa would cancel his quirk and Deku's, saying that nobody was going to be touching nobody on his watch. And at this, Bakugo would walk off, saying that damn extra isn't worth anything anyways, making his way to the cafeteria, where Shinso would ask what's going on with them. And Izuku would go on to reveal the lore between himself and Katsuki Bakugo. At hearing the history between the two boys, Shinso would be stunned that something like this runs that deep, and with Izuku lost in thought about all the times that he cowered in Bakugo, he would think to himself that it's about time he got a little payback. However, halting his train of thought, Shinso waving his hand in his face would say, "Deku, you there?" as he would nod, going on to explain that he was just remembering a couple of things. And so the two would end up having a pretty good day, as they would spend the next week until eventually Saturday would come, preparing for the UA Sports Festival. That entire week, Izuku would only end up doing vigilante activities for 3 days, not partaking in anything too crazy, and only dealing with petty thieves, robbers, and random little fights that he would break up. Kind of similar to the stuff we actually see Koichi doing in My Hero Vigilantes. And with time coming and going, eventually Izuku would find himself with everybody else. Class 1A, Class 1B, the business course, as all of them would watch on as Bakugo goes up and gives his speech saying, "I'm gonna win." Izuku hearing this would think to himself that he half expected that, and so, as soon as the first event would begin, Izuku would be ready to show everybody just how much he was truly capable of. It's here where, turning towards Shinso and nodding, the two boys would understand that they have different paths to follow for the first event, and they're each gonna try to make the best of what they can do. So, as soon as the test would begin, Izuku would sit there in the back waiting for everybody else to get ahead of him, seeing as having some targets to teleport to is going to be making this victory a lot cooler looking. And if he can make it all the more sweet by taking first place from Bakugo, who he already knows will most likely perform well, then that'll just be the cherry on top. So as everybody would bypass him and people would recognize so many students going by, President Mike would be quick to point out who the person in last place is, seeing as not only has Izuku not moved the muscle, but he also has a little bit of a history with him. And as people would start getting further and further along the race, Izuku would smirk as he would start bolting towards the direction of the nearest contestant. As soon as he was 40 feet away from him, Izuku would dash, going right behind him, leaping over him like it was leapfrog, then dashing to the next, and the next, and the next, appearing as though he was simply just teleporting throughout the battlefield. And with President Mike starting to point out that the kid who was stuck in dead last has now seemingly made his way to the front by teleporting from person to person, he would start going nuts, saying, "Izuku Midoriya is showing an incredible quirk, and ladies and gentlemen, can you believe it if I told you he was just in the general course?" As we would see Izuku blitzing and blitzing the next person, until eventually he would smirk, seeing Ida, the boy using his reciprocal burst quirk to close the gap between the other two. And Izuku, noticing that they were approaching the minefield, he would bide his time, never allowing the gap to become too large, until eventually they would be neck and neck, about to cross the finish line. This is when Izuku would use his dash quirk to appear right in front of Bakugo, as crossing the finish line just momentarily before him, Izuku would be crowned the winner. And with Bakugo seeing what had just happened, he would be pissed. As we would watch on as Bakugo would march towards Izuku, asking him what in the world that was. Izuku, though, in this moment would stare him directly in his eyes and tell him that that was him beating him. Bakugo, hearing that come out of his mouth, would be about to blast an explosion at him, but President Mike over the intercoms would say, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, settle down. We still haven't quite reached the 1v1 section, Katsuki Bakugo, so unless you want to be eliminated, I suggest you calm down." And with Bakugo staring at Izuku, he would watch as the boy that he had teased all of his life suddenly grew a backbone, walking right past him, telling him, "Yeah, calm down, Kachan," before suddenly stopping and saying, "It's not like I've fully beaten you yet. That's gonna come at the end." To which Bakugo, after hearing this declaration, would be seething from his teeth. After this obviously would come the cavalry battle section, but because I quite literally could not hate this section more, we're going to be skipping it, allowing every single contestant that usually would have passed to still pass, much like they do in the original, with the tournament bracket being set up and Izuku noticing who his first opponent was, immediately just thinking to himself, "Crap," at the realization that either he was going to beat Shinso or Shinso was going to beat him. At this, Izuku would go deadly silent, until eventually Shinso out from behind would tell Izuku that he hopes that they could have a good match and to not go too crazy on him. Izuku would look at his pal, smiling, telling him that he wouldn't dream of it, as eventually both of them would be called up for their first battle, And we would watch as the two best friends would now have to face off against each other. Izuku would turn to Shinso wishing him luck, with the boy doing the same. And the moment that President Mike would start the battle, Izuku would instantly kick everything off by speed blitzing Shinso and landing a punch straight to the gut, with Shinso mildly absorbing some of the impact since he would have put his hands in the way. That said, as Izuku would return to his origin spot and would begin running around the battlefield at his top speeds, this is his human speed by the way, he would then start blitzing towards the direction of Shinso, landing blow after blow after blow. So with Shinso slowly starting to be pushed backwards, he would eventually lock in, remembering every single point of his training, and eventually starting to actually keep up with Izuku. Once Izuku would speed blitz towards him, Shinso would throw a punch that would nearly graze Izuku. Or actually it would graze him, shocking Izuku, who at jumping back to his origin point would tell Shinso that he's gotten a lot better. And with Shinso smiling and rushing back in this like semi-boxing stance, he would then throw a right hook, with Izuku weaving underneath before throwing a blow at his ribcage. At this, Shinso would yell out, "Damn Deku, just how strong did you get?" As Izuku would answer back, very, knowing what he was doing. And with Shinso having tried to use his quirk on Izuku to catch him off guard somehow, it would work, stunning Shinso, who didn't expect anything to work, since after all, Izuku knew how his quirk functioned. There was no way he was dumb enough to just fall for it, right? Unless he just gave him the win. Shinso, realizing this, would have a bit of a saddened expression, until understanding that his friend was doing this for his sake, seeing as he already had his moment to shine back during the obstacle course, Izuku was doing what a friend would do. So Shinso, accepting this gesture, would tell Izuku to walk off. As we would watch Izuku internally in his mindscape thinking to himself that he's happy, his friend deserves to go into the hero course, and not somebody who's been playing Vigilante at night, doing illegal activities, and was literally trained by a villain. Izuku would feel happy about all this, and with the match finally being over, he would congratulate Shinso, telling him it was a good job teasing him so that he could get his quirk off on him, with Shinso looking at him and telling him that he's not an idiot, he knows he let him win. With Izuku just rubbing the back of his head and saying, well, I couldn't just let my partner in crime fall, could I? As we would then watch on as Izuku would congratulate Shinso once more, telling him to do his best for him out there. So, with Shinso moving on to his second opponent, we would watch on as Shinso would step in the ring with Shoto Todoroki, and since Izuku has no connection to All Might, isn't in the hero course, and doesn't have a quirk even slightly resembling All Might, there's no reason that we would get the whole, love child theory from Todoroki. And so, with the match instantly beginning, I could see two outcomes. Number one, Shinso would get completely frozen by Todoroki, or number two, which is if he's lucky, he would be able to use his mind control ability on Todoroki by getting him to say something after making a snide remark about his scar and how blessed he is to have a quirk like that. So with Shino kind of being one of the characters that I actually care about more in this scenario, I'm going to be going with option 2. So with Todoroki falling under the mind control, before he even gets the chance to use his ice, Shinso would say walk off, and we would watch on as Todoroki would do just that, as the third match would come and go, with it being against Tenya Ida. However, due to the boy once again having a phone call from his family members, informing him that his older brother was attacked by the hero killer, he would forfeit the match, leading Shinso to actually be the one to face Katsuki in the finals. And seeing as Bakugo had two opportunities to see what had happened with him, and was able to deduct that his quirk had something to do with controlling people based on him getting a reply for them or something along those lines, he would completely avoid saying anything, not even making snarky remarks during the fight, simply playing it safe. This would lead to Shinso being completely obliterated, seeing as Bakugo has long range attacks and could simply just overwhelm him with explosions, as we in this timeline watch as Bakugo wins with zero roadblocks in his way. This would piss off Bakugo, who, knowing that he would have had a fight against Todoroki or even that damn Deku, would say that his win was invalid, that he didn't get to go up against the real strongest characters and he wants a redo. But due to the way that the sports festival worked, they all ignore him, give him his medal, and call it a day. So once again, the League of Villains would have plans of trying to potentially sway him to the villain side, and with that, we jump cut to everybody returning back to UA, with Shinso and Izuku, once again reporting to their boring general course stuff. And this is when suddenly a teacher would walk into the room. It would be Mr. Aizawa, who would say if he can borrow one of her students. This is when he would call forth Shinso, and the two would make their way to the hallway to have a bit of a chat, as Aizawa would go on to explain to him that due to his performance during the sports festival and the usage of his quirk, hiding it as much as he needed to in order to advance as far as he did, he was impressed, telling Shinso that he believes he could be a great hero, that much like him, he has a quirk that doesn't exactly fall under the normal category of flashy quirk, but something that could genuinely be used as a nighttime hero. So he would offer Shinso two things: one, a position in class 1A, and two, mentorship for the boy, training him in not only using his scarf, but different tactics that he's learned throughout his years of being a hero. Shinso, at hearing this declaration from Aizawa, would be stunned, and once again walking into the classroom and explaining to Izuku everything that had just gone down, Izuku would cheer for him, knowing that should have happened, and if anybody deserved it, it was Shinso. So being happy at his friend and telling him not to worry about him, that he'll probably join him next year, Shinso would be like, dude, I don't know what to say. That should have been your spot. You probably could have even beaten Akatsuki Bakugo if it wasn't for feeling pity for me. But Izuku would tell him that it's not pity what he felt, but a genuine desire to see his friend doing good at life and accomplishing his goals. He's seen the hard work and he's seen the life he's lived. He deserves it. So Shinso, looking at him, would thank him, telling him that they could still hang out at lunch, with Izuku saying of course they can, unless his new friends make him forget about him. Shinso would say, what new friends? As at this, Shinso would get his things and then be admitted to class 1A. He would be caught up on a couple of things and introduced that same day, where Shinso would now not only go on to be introduced to all of his classmates, but the pro hero Midnight. And at this, they would go over not only their hero internship opportunities, which he would get from Aizawa, but their pro hero names. So with that being said, eventually the day would end and we would find Izuku in his room, simply tossing a knife up into the air, catching it once more, and doing this over and over and over. As he would do this, he would think about how nice it must have actually been for Shinso to have enjoyed his first day in class 1A and to have actually become a hero. At this, he would receive a text and, honestly, feeling a bit jealous of Shinso, thinking that maybe he should have taken the win, he would suddenly shake his head, thinking that no, he's an idiot, that's not how a friend thinks, before putting on his vigilante costume and thinking that he needs to blow off some steam. At this, the boy would open his window before dashing to the ground, and once again doing this to get on top of a building staircase, then to the very top of it. After Izuku would be done doing this, Izuku would jump from rooftop to rooftop, trying to see if there was any crime that he could stop. And to his surprise, it would be a quiet night, peaceful. Him just watching his family, his friends, and people of the night are just casually enjoying their time. Izuku, realizing that maybe being a vigilante isn't what this little city needs, would think to himself that he's just gonna go back home. After all, he's been being an idiot, and this whole vigilante thing isn't cut out for him. He's done. He's gonna hang it up and focus on trying to become a hero the right way. But as Izuku would think all of these thoughts, this is when suddenly Izuku would hear the screams of a woman nearby. And with Izuku hearing this, having no choice but to go investigate what was going on, Izuku would quickly land, seeing that there was a man and a woman attacking her. Izuku, noting this, using his dash quirk, would instantly rush to the direction of the man. However, as he would do this, his arm would suddenly be wrapped around with a scarf. Izuku, noticing this, would realize he just made the biggest mistake, because now facing him was the one hero that he knew could cause him the biggest problem of all, Eraserhead. But that wasn't where his problems ended, because next to Aizawa was actually another pro hero by the name of Midnight. And some of you guys might be like, whoa, like, ain't Aizawa a teacher, bro? Like, what's he doing all this actual pro hero work? And while yes, he is a teacher, he does every now and then partake in hero work. Why do y'all think he's so tired all the time? The dude's busy teaching all day, and then all night the dude's out there patrolling and stuff. So with him hearing about a vigilante patrolling the streets lately, he's been been wanting to find this person and meet him to see what his intentions are, seeing as Aizawa has been known to actually interact with vigilantes and work with them before. In case you guys don't know what I'm talking about, read the spin-off series My Hero Vigilantes. It's genuinely peak. But anyways, I digress. Point being, after this would happen, Aizawa holding Izuku down with his scarf would say, "We've got some questions for you." And Izuku, looking around, darting his eyes to see if there was anything he could do, he would attempt to pry away at the scarf. But when it would become obvious that nothing was happening, Izuku, grabbing a knife from one of his holsters in his leg, would proceed to attempt to cut the scarf. However, his blade would only manage to cut 1/4 of the way through, Aizawa smiling and telling him that he didn't think he was a rookie, did he? Before throwing a kick at Izuku, sending him crashing towards a trash can. Bags of garbage would then spill on the ground, with mystery juice falling on Izuku as he would look up towards Aizawa, his hair floating, as suddenly Izuku could see a mist beginning to form, because Midnight was using her quirk. However, luckily for Izuku, we're going to be doing a bit of a flashback. Remember how Izuku had asked for a support item from Mei Hatsume, those gloves? Well, safe to say, they're done. And in case you guys actually want to see what those look like, then go to that one section in the story, I think it was like 1 hour and something minutes in, where I was over there saying that this is where I was going to show you what Izuku's costume looked like, because I actually edited it in there. So if you guys want to see what it looks like, go there. But anyways, point being, Izuku had gotten those gloves and they have electrifying properties, which means that, you know, they can kind of like shoot electricity at things. But also that cool little mask that he has, like that All Might mask that he has originally, he had something similar to that be made for him, which essentially acts as a mask to, you know, help him breathe in like bad circumstances, seeing as explosions and stuff like that are kind of common for heroes. And it even has the added benefit of just making him look cool. So with that said, he would put the mask on as he would stun the both of them, realizing that he came prepared for this. Did he know they were going to try to ambush him and yet still leap down? Aizawa would have a couple of questions in his head brewing up, but with Izuku unwilling to let himself be captured in this moment, he would then do the only thing that could come to his mind at the moment, electrocuting the scarf, which through the scarf's like materials would be a bit conductive, shocking Aizawa, who at flinching a bit at this would loosen his grip on the scarf. This would give Izuku just enough leeway to rip out of it before running out of the pro hero's point of view. At this, the man using a scarf would then leap from lamppost to lamppost, Midnight saying that she'll catch up, finding her own way. The two heroes would now be in hot pursuit of Izuku, and with Izuku using his dash quirk to create a massive amount of distance from them, he would think himself to have gotten away. However, in this moment, a pro hero would arrive that Izuku was not expecting. Kamui Woods. "Lacquered chain prison!" the man would scream, as his binding attack would wrap around Izuku, completely leaving him motionless. The man, believing he had captured him, would call in Aizawa, telling him that he had just captured that little vigilante he's been on about. However, when he would look back, Izuku would be gone, and he would be stunned. How? Did he teleport or something? And Izuku would be turning around the corner. However, he would fall right into Aizawa's point of view, and him canceling his quirk once more would then jump down, telling the kid that they're done playing games, wrapping him up in his scarf before pulling him towards him and landing a blow so powerful that it leaves the boy unconscious. It's here where Aizawa, walking over towards Izuku, would proceed to unmask the kid. Seeing that bright green hair and that face, it was unmistakable. This was the same troublemaking kid who was there present during the news press incident and also encountered the villain, as well as the boy who performed extremely well during the sports festival, his actual second candidate to join Class 1B. However, with this revelation, there was no way that was going to be happening now. And with Izuku shortly waking up being tied in the back of Aizawa's car, he would ask Aizawa what's going on, realizing that he was unmasked. With once this realization having hit Izuku, he would go dead silent, Aizawa telling him that he has a few questions to answer. So with Izuku suddenly arriving outside of Class 1A, Aizawa would tell him that he's lucky that he knows him, because if not, he would be throwing him straight in jail. But before that, they have a few questions to ask. A little bit afterwards, Izuku would be walked into a room where Principal Nezu would be there once again with a police officer that he had never seen before. This guy is like a dog man or something like that. Looks like they had maybe requested a favor or something. At this, Izuku would then have a question be asked by him from Principal Nezu, and with Izuku answering it, the policeman would say that he's lying, his nose glowing red, which is kind of funny. But anyways, after this would happen, Izuku would realize what's going on, connecting the dots almost immediately. That dude has some sort of lying detection quirk, and his nose is going to glow red every time he lies. So now realizing that he's screwed if he doesn't answer these questions truthfully, Izuku would have no choice but to do just that, with Nezu asking him why it was that he was performing vigilante activities. Izuku would go on to tell him that he was doing that because he wanted to make a difference, because seeing as he was stuck in the general course and didn't have a path forward to becoming a hero, he figured this was the best way he could do that. He wants to help people. He's not a villain. The dog's nose wouldn't glow red, so knowing that he's telling the truth, they would then go on to ask one more question. Is it true that you had no involvement with the villain during the USJ incident? And Izuku would say he didn't. I don't even know who he was. I meant it what I said last time. And with the dog's nose not glowing, Nezu would say, I see, so you truly were trying to make a difference. Well, Aizawa, I hope this puts your thoughts to rest. As we watch the scruffy man simply nod his head yes, before then looking towards Izuku and asking him whether or not he knew his activities were 100% illegal, regardless of his intentions. Izuku would nod, saying that he did, admitting that at first it didn't start like that. Seeing as the first time that he had tried to play vigilante or hero, he ended up getting himself kidnapped. And there was where everything started to change for him. He would go on to explain the story of being trained by the hero killer Stain, how he had seen potential in his quirk and is honestly the only reason that he's gotten as strong as he had. Then going on to tell him about the story of how he went out to save somebody, and that rush, that thrill that he got was something that he just wanted more of. So lying to himself all this time and telling himself that he was making a difference, he was saving lives. He kept telling himself those things to continue doing these activities, but even he knew they were wrong. And with Aizawa hearing this coming out of the boy's mouth, he would go on to nod, telling him that the kid's not evil, but what he was doing was idiotic, though he does understand it, seeing as he has a couple vigilante friends himself. At this, he would then remember Koichi, Knuckle Duster, and even Popsteph from the time of his youth before he was a hero. And looking at Izuku, knowing that this boy was either going to be now going in jail or getting expelled and potentially continuing his vigilanteism, he would turn to Nezu, telling him that he believes that the boy should be admitted into Class 1A. So that his heroic potential wouldn't go to waste and wouldn't simply rot away in a jail cell. It'd be better to have this boy on their side than have them against him. And so Nezu would agree, saying that he actually had agreed and that he was planning to introduce the boy into Class 1A, dependent entirely on the boy's behavior for a couple more months, seeing as that little incident that happened between him and the news reporters had left a sour taste in some UA faculty members. And with Izuku hearing that he might actually be thrown into the hero course alongside Shinso, he would be pretty damn excited. At this, the boy would then be released, with Aizawa telling him that he's going to be pushing him harder than ever before, with Izuku smiling and thanking Aizawa, realizing that he really was an idiot to do all that vigilanteism all those times, but it did technically get the results that he was looking for, so maybe he was onto something. But as Izuku would make his way home, wanting to text Shinso of what had actually happened, he would then think, actually, maybe I should just surprise him in class. Plus, when he starts asking questions, it's not going to be too fun telling him that I've been playing vigilante all this time. So, as Izuku would do this, he would simply scroll on his phone, eventually finding the news of the pro hero Ingenium having gone live. He was apparently attacked, and to top it all off, it was obviously done by the hero killer Stain. Izuku, realizing that Stain had got after somebody like Ingenium, would be stunned, thinking that Stain only went after false heroes, but Ingenium's genuinely seemed like one of the most real, down-to-earth heroes ever. He was stunned, questioning Stain on his ideologies and whether he was changing somehow. But not really wanting to get involved with Stain or seek him out, seeing as the last time he did, things didn't end up too good, he would simply remain silent, biding his time until eventually the week would be over for the internships. And seeing as the whole Stain situation would have happened like in the original, and Izuku would not have been there, this means that unlike in the original, Ida actually dies this time around. So with Izuku finding out that one of the classmates that he was actually gonna be taking class 1A with had actually died, and in fact it was the class rep, Izuku would be shocked. Stain killed a minor. Izuku at hearing this would get pissed, thinking that this is no longer something he can ignore. He needs to confront Stain. So with the boy hearing this news and going dead silent during the entirety of the class, Shinso, having been excited about, his classmate there, would be like, yo, Izuku, you look off. Izuku telling Shinso that he'll catch up to him, staying behind in the class with Aizawa and telling him that things just got personal. Stain killed a minor. He never thought Stain would take things that far, but he did. And he's the only one that can stop Stain. He knows how he thinks, he knows how he fights, he even thinks he knows where Stain might be hiding. Aizawa hearing this would look at Izuku, telling him that that's not his responsibility, and that heroes are the ones to take care of villains. But Izuku would say that he was a hero not too long ago, Aizawa cutting him off, telling him that that was vigilantism, and there's nothing heroic about that. With Izuku telling him that he thinks the people whose lives he saved would think differently. Then, squaring off against his own teacher in the classroom, Aizawa would tell him that if he's really trying to do this right now, he should stop, because if he continues, he will be expelled. Izuku would look at Aizawa, telling him that if the hero's plan is just let Stain continue out there, then he doesn't care if he gets expelled, because his expulsion will mean that another hero gets to live. Aizawa hearing those words and seeing the determined look in Izuku's eyes would tell him that he'll at least hear him out. And Izuku, going on to explain more details about his time with Stain, would go on to shock Aizawa with how much the boy truly did know, how his quirk operated, how Stain thought, what heroes he considered the villains, how normally Stain had a list of heroes that he was trying to take down in every city, and how usually he would stop at a specific amount of kills. However, the only exception to that was when he was training yours truly. So Aizawa, taking all of this into account, would question Izuku on what he thinks that the best strategy would be to take down the hero killer, and Izuku would tell him that he can think of only one, but he probably wasn't going to like it. At this, Izuku would go on to tell him that he's the best counter they have against Stain. Of course, other heroes might be able to handle the hero killer, but it won't come easily. He is best equipped for this. Aizawa might believe that he might be, but Stain doesn't need a quirk to fight like Izuku does. He's on another level. Aizawa, hearing this, would nod, telling Izuku that he would bring this up with the principal and see if there was a possibility that maybe the two of them could handle this. Since after all, Aizawa did have to agree that he didn't enjoy the thought of more heroes falling day by day. So with a few days passing and Aizawa being cleared by Nezu in order to attempt to take down the hero killer alongside two other heroes that would tag along, Izuku, Aizawa, and the two extras, which I could not bother to name right now, would make their way towards the town where Izuku knows Stain would strike at next. And pretty much using their intercon communication devices, they would all be on the lookout for Stain, Izuku telling them all to be extremely careful, him actually searching warehouses where he believes Stain might be hiding at the moment, seeing as that was Stain's preferred location for hoisting up a base. Eventually, Izuku would find one that shows clear signs that Stain had been there, and saying into the intercoms that he had not found the hero killer since it was still about 7 PM and the sun was still dropping. Izuku would enter the facility, with the moment that he would, then suddenly being greeted by a throwing knife being tossed at him, with Izuku easily dodging. His vigilante costume on, with Izuku taking off his mask, revealing himself to be Izuku Midoriya. Stain, seeing the brat, would let out a, "Well, if it isn't Izuku Midoriya, what are you doing here, brat? My business with you is over. I taught you how to use your quirk, and now it's up to you to see if you can become a proper hero with it." But Izuku, in reply of this, would say, "Taught? You beat me half an inch of my life every single day. I don't know if I would call that teaching. But that's not why I'm here. You know, in a strange way, I'm actually a bit grateful to you. But what I'm not grateful at is you going around slaughtering literal teenagers. What is this, Stain? I didn't know you went around killing minors now. I thought you were the hero killer. He didn't count as one. But Stain would tell him not to patronize him or tell him what to do, that he follows his ideology and that vengeful brat had it coming. His eyes were filled with disdain for him and a look of bloodlust. He had to be taken down. If that boy was allowed to continue living, he was simply going to turn out to be a false hero. And Izuku would tell him, "What? You killed him because he had revenge? Are you kidding me, Stain? Anybody would feel revenge after hearing that their older brother had just been brutalized by the hero killer. Heck, even I was pissed. Ingenium was among one of the greatest heroes of our generation. Was he the strongest? No, but he did quick and efficient work and brought hope to his community. Now what do they have now? Fear of going out at night because they're afraid of encountering you? Are you kidding me, Stain?" But Stain at this would tell him to get lost. One more word and he will kill him. And Izuku would tell him, "I would like to see you try." As Stain would throw a knife at him, with Izuku dodging to a different location than where Stain had been expecting. He would then grab his knife out from the ground, saying that he had gotten a lot better at using his quirk, and that he better hope that for his sake, he can beat him, because this battle is life or death. And immediately Stain and Izuku rushing at each other inside of that warehouse would start clashing with their blades. Stain saying that he's even grown stronger. Izuku then puncturing Stain in the side, causing the villain to jump backwards, with Izuku using his quirk to return to his origin point, then speed blitzing Stain by tossing a bunch of leaves at his direction. Stain, unaware of which one he was going to blitz at next, would watch on as Izuku would land strike after strike after strike on the hero killer. The hero killer at this would become enraged, slicing his blade wildly, uncaring about the consequences to his body, eventually slashing at Izuku's leg like his thigh area. This would significantly slow down Izuku's footwork and would lead to the both of them starting to get into a bit of a stalemate situation. This only being the case because remember, Stain is kind of the one who trained Deku, so even though Izuku knows everything Stain taught him, that doesn't mean that that's everything Stain knows. So attacking Izuku once more, again and again and again and again, attacking him, piercing him, and then eventually landing some clean strikes on his face, his arm, and even like managing to smack one of the blades out of Izuku's hands. Izuku would be left with no other choice but to fight with the small dagger that he was holding in a hoister and his glove, and teleporting right next to Stain, he would punch him with a supercharged electricity blast, which would not only stun the hero killer long enough for him to puncture the blade into into the hero killer's ribs, leaving it there, and then teleport away, but for Izuku to tell the hero killer to give it up, that he's become stronger than him already, and unless he feels like bleeding out on the ground here, he suggests he would come willingly. However, Stain would simply take that thing out, releasing all of his conviction. That bloodlust that he had released against Endeavor and the heroes when they were all about to capture him, he would proceed to stare down Izuku, moving at faster speeds than he had used before, managing to stun the boy and sending the piece of pipe that Izuku was using as a sword onto the ground. Izuku, seeing this, would start zipping around, throwing a bunch more leaves in the air. However, Stain would be keeping up, predicting the attacks, telling Izuku that he's done for, with a terrifying expression on his face. In this moment, however, Izuku, once more tapping into the zone, would then start blitzing around even faster than before, his arms and legs moving without him even needing to think about it, as more and more blows would start to pile on the hero killer until eventually his body would give out and he would fall down unconscious. Izuku at this would capture the hero killer, calling Aizawa, telling him that he'd found him and to arrive quickly before the hero killer beats him. However, it's in this moment that the voice of Aizawa would echo in the building. He would go on to tell him that he's been here the whole time. Why does he think Stain's quirk didn't work on him? And Izuku in this moment would realize, blood curdle. I could have died, with Aizawa telling him he could have, informing the boy that he's still not a hero, and powerful as he may be, there's some things that he just needs to leave to the heroes. So, with Izuku looking down and realizing, damn, like Aizawa literally just saved my life, he would be grateful, like bowing down to Aizawa, telling him that if not for him, he literally could have died right then and there, that Stain was serious. Aizawa telling Izuku that he is a terrifying fighter, and that if it wasn't for his quirk, he would actually probably beat him. At this, Izuku would kind of like smile a little bit as they would capture the hero killer, bringing him into justice, where the man would be locked up in Tartarus. The aftermath of these events would not really be felt too much, seeing as UA was currently closed, seeing as the situation with Ida family had gone down and, there was kind of a death in the family. That's, not exactly a small thing. This means that events like in the normal story would eventually start to pass on by, and interestingly enough, it kind of resembles the original timeline story of events that we get normally. Because remember, after this, they have the final exams, which Izuku, he's obviously a smart kid. He does very well on. He then has to face off against Aizawa, because I think that him facing off against Aizawa during the final exams would probably be pretty cool. But seeing as I had already covered a fight between Izuku and Aizawa, and obviously he came out on top, I don't think there's a reason to cover a way lower stake fight where Izuku's going to be having a teammate, kind of making it a bit more obvious as to who's going to win, seeing as it would probably still be Momo. So with that being the case, we then jump cut to the Forest training arc, where we once again see the Vanguard Action Squad plotting their attack at UA, Izuku once again being present this time around. However, due to Izuku and Shinso's inclusion to the story, and with the two being best friends, I believe that section of the story where Izuku faces Muscular would literally have his life saved by Shinso, and I'm not even trying to be ironic in this moment. Remember, Muscular's quirk is low-key kind of a perfect defense against Izuku, and because Izuku's kind of in the hero course, using blades is more or less his last resort, and that lightning stuff, those lightning punches that he can land with his little like a lightning device gloves, they're not going to be doing too much to Muscular other than maybe like causing the muscles to spasm a little bit, but the defense that those muscles provide and the augmentation is going to be too much for Izuku. And when you start talking about blades, while yes, he can technically cut the muscles, Izuku has a very hard time facing off against Muscular because he has to use nothing but hit and run tactics, blitzing into the forest, grabbing leaves, tossing them into the air, and striking at Muscular, hoping not to get hit, because if a punch from Muscular does land, oh boy, is Deku going to be in a world of trouble. It's at this moment that Izuku, wearing his iconic mask and cool little vigilante costume, because that's the one that he's rocking for his hero career, Izuku would suddenly be about to get hit by Muscular, Izuku having been caught off guard, when suddenly Izuku's voice would ring out, asking Muscular when he planned to take this seriously, with the big old brute saying, "He's bit," but ultimately stopping in his tracks. The big behemoth would now be turned on the League of Villains, with Izuku thanking Shinso for saving his butt back there, and Shinso saying that it was no problem. He gave him just enough time to take Koda back to the heroes and inform Aizawa and the rest of them of what was going down. But by the time he had gotten there, he was already facing off against villains of his own, so they're aware. At this, the two heroes would then go into the forest, where they attempt to help out anybody and anyone that they can, using Muscular to their advantage thanks to Shinso's quirk, and leading him to actually be the one to take down Moonfish, which I think would be kind of hilarious. That said, this is when the section of the story would come around where Bakugo would ultimately be taken down by the villains, and we would watch on as Izuku would be chasing after Kacchan, not wanting him or Tokiyami to be kidnapped, and using the leaves in the area to his advantage and trees and stuff like that. He would be blitzing around, about to confront Moonfish, Mr. Compress, before a huge wave of flames would be shot at Izuku, which he can't dodge because when he's in his dash state, although most things can't hit him, meaning, normal paced attacks, flames, electricity, and stuff of that likes can actually harm him. So Izuku being sent backwards has to be forced to watch on as the villains would kidnap Bakugo and he would sit there helplessly. Izuku in this moment would slam his hand down at the ground, screaming, "Damn it! Damn it! Damn it! I let them get away. Some freaking speed hero I am," as Shinso, going over towards him with the Muscular, still being under his mind control, would say, "Izuku, don't worry, we'll figure out a way to get them back." But Izuku would say, "We shouldn't have to. If I've reacted faster, if I'd just been a better... none of this would have happened." But Shinso would tell him that it's not his fault, as the boy would sit there and, rain hitting him, hair kind of falling down, looking up at Shinso, would say, "Yeah, you're right." After this is when we would then jump cut to Bakugo getting kidnapped, and we would now have a little bit of a flashback moment. Izuku in the back of the bus traveling back to their, the hospital where all of them get, checked out for injuries and stuff like that. And luckily, thanks to Izuku's quirk, he got no injuries this time around, minus, some minor burn marks. But yeah, That said, at this, Izuku would be having a flashback moment to when he was actually introduced to the class once things were back in, and him and Bakugo, to say the least, did not have the best of interactions. However, after a little incident that would take place at night where Bakugo and Izuku would finally have the time to square off, this is where things would have changed between the two, because Bakugo would have gained respect for Izuku, and Izuku would have made it painfully clear that he was no longer a punching bag. Because in this timeline, unlike in the original, Izuku would most likely, well, not most likely, for sure, beat Bakugo, using nothing but his lightning gauntlets, which he would have used to slowly weaken the boy, eventually leading Bakugo to be on the ground, where Izuku would tell him the hard cold fact that because he was using these gloves on him, he was actually limited. Had he been using knives or something along those lines, Bakugo would have been dead at the first strike. And don't even get him started on him using guns. Bakugo, realizing that Izuku was no longer that weak little kid he remembers, would kind of have respect for Deku but also have more anger towards him. It's kind of like a strange relationship that they end up getting after this little interaction would happen between them, but nonetheless, their relationship and dynamic changes a lot after this. So with Izuku remembering that chat that they would have at that night when Aizawa suddenly came around and like grounded the two of them, this is when we would watch on as Izuku's just kind of like looking out the window, just feeling pissed. Eventually, the students would all be informed about what's going to actually take place in regards to the saving of Bakugo, and we would get the same group that normally in the story would go after him, where this is where we would actually have a vengeful Izuku having one question in his mind. Are these villains worthy of even being thrown in a jail cell? Because it's not like this is the first time they've attacked UA. This is the second, and this time they took things way too far. They kidnapped students. Are they out of their mind? Because remember, in this timeline, they not only just kidnapped Kachan, but straight up Tokiyami as well. So, that's kind of a thing. And so with Izuku having all of these thoughts, the ideologies of Stain would start kind of plaguing his mind, Izuku thinking that some villains need to be taken out. So hiding 2 dagger blades within his coat that he would be wearing for his hero costume, again, if you want to see what it looks like, check out that part of the video I keep telling y'all about. He would pretty much put those, have his gloves, and also have a metal bat on his back, which Izuku was more than prepared to use. We would then watch on as the students would once again get into those strange outfits that they had in the original, all minus Izuku, who was like, I'm not wearing that ridiculous thing. Oh, and also in this timeline, Shinso would actually also be present. So we kind of just see obviously he's replacing Ida, right? Because we don't have Ida in this timeline. So when the students are all watching everything that's taking place and we see them seeing the villains, Izuku would on look, thinking of a plan. How can he take them all down as effectively as possible? One thought would flash through his head. If Izuku can speed blitz Dabi using his quirk to get up close and slash his neck, he would die, creating an opening for him to use his quirk on the rest of them, and that way he can have the entire thing cleared out in about 10 seconds. But this is when suddenly another half of Izuku would say that he's not a killer. And as Izuku would sit there battling what's happening, as he would watch on as All Might is literally being beat by All For One, all because the students can't figure out a way to do anything against him, Izuku would think, screw it! Suddenly blitzing right in front of Dabi, whose eyes would widen as he would slash the boy's throat clean in half. This is when Dabi's body would fall to the ground, shooting flames waywardly without any control, actually burning magma, killing him in an instant, as Izuku would then speed blitz towards the direction of Spinner, slashing him square in the chest, causing him to fall down onto the ground, as we would see Mr. Compress throwing debris at Izuku, attempting to catch him off guard. However, this debris would do the opposite, Izuku using them as origin points before then blitzing towards Mr. Compress himself and slashing one of his arms clean off, following this by stabbing him in the ribcage and leaving his dagger embedded into him. After this, Izuku would now face off against Toga and Shigaraki. Toga feeling fear, recognizing that Izuku is clearly on another level, and all the while this would be happening, the students at UA would be shocked. Did Izuku just... Shinso would be thinking, as All Might watching on as a student that had just been admitted into UA had just killed villains, and he didn't just do it, he killed them on national television, mind you, which means that now Izuku had to finish the job, because what's done was done. And in this moment, we would watch on as Shigaraki would rush Izuku, going, "Ah, I'll kill you, you brat!" But as he would get closer and closer, Izuku's eyes would practically blink, slashing Shigaraki in the back before then appearing behind Toga and driving his blade straight into her solar plexus. After this would happen, Izuku would then jump up into the air as he would throw a throwing blade straight into the head of Shigaraki, piercing him in the skull, killing him practically instantly, then beginning to walk towards Toga. And with Shinso seeing that Izuku was about to kill that girl, who looks no older than they are, would yell out, "Deku!" Us watching as Izuku would stop the onslaught, with Tokiyami and Bakugo staring at him. Bakugo in this moment would then reflect on the words that Izuku had told him last time they fought, realizing that this is how dangerous Izuku was, all the while Tokiyami would feel in horror, throwing up on the ground at the fact that the student that had literally just been transferred in from the general course had it in him to do something like that. And with Izuku having snapped out of that state that he was just in, then looking towards the direction of Bakugo and Tokiyami in shock, was it that they need to go. All Might needs the space to fight. However, black tendrils would shoot out towards the direction of Izuku, with him narrowly dodging and then piercing Bakugo. He would tell them to go now, as he would blitz in towards the direction of All For One, swinging a baseball bat as air repulsor would then shoot towards Izuku, sending him crashing into some stone. At this, All Might would wake out of his daze, realizing that he needs to fight All For One, and then the battle between All For One and All Might would resume. This battle would conclude much like it would in the original, with All For One laying on the ground, practically dead, laughing in All Might's face, as we then see Izuku, who had been not only being hit by the impact of their crazy clash and the wind stuff, but Izuku's head literally rattled into straight up concrete, would then slightly wake up like groggily, you know what I mean, like he wasn't in his right mind, and he would watch on as All Might would stand above him. In this moment, Izuku seeing that All For One was still laughing in All Might's freaking face, would straight up speed blitz in front of All For One, sitting on top of his chest, plunging his blade into his heart, saying, "Laugh at that, scumbag." With us watching as All Might would tell Izuku that what he has just done is unforgivable. And Izuku would turn towards All Might, telling him that he did what needed to be done, asking All Might if he believed that once in prison, the tyranny of this villain was going to end. Does he truly believe that he was going to stay locked up forever, and those villains that had caused so much trauma in other people's lives, does he believe that they deserved a second chance? Being thrown in Tartarus is a mercy of a consequence for the actions they committed. They deserve their deaths. But as All Might would stare at the boy and nod no, Izuku would stare in the eyes of the man he had once idolized before telling him that he's wrong, and one day he'll see it. They'll all see it, pointing at the camera, saying that he did what needed to be done. Villains shouldn't get a second chance. And All Might, hearing these final words from Izuku, would look at him sad and saying that maybe the boy had a little too much stain in him after all. With Izuku's eyes watering and heroes clearly now rushing towards Izuku to attempt to capture him, Izuku in this moment would use his dash quirk to get away, as he would successfully escape the heroes, going on to take a new mantle, now and forever being known as Stain.
Hey, you made it to the end of the video! Like it or die!
That wasn't the line, Kachan!
Whatever!